Okay, everybody, welcome to the Scrutiny Committee of the 28th of November 2018. There are no fire drills planned, so I would leave the building if there's any emergency bell going off. And officers are welcome to leave after their item. So I would like to welcome everybody here at Scrutiny, and I would like to especially welcome Live Active Leisure for coming along today, and I will have to declare an interest being a board member of Live Active Leisure, and I'll pass over to Sheila there. So welcome Paul, who is the new Chief Executive of Live Active Leisure, who moved up when Jim Moyes retired, and we've got one of the fellow board members is Dave Longmuir, so welcome to him. So before we go on to that, do we have any apologies for today?
Yes, Convener. We've got apologies from Councillor Coates and Councillor Duff, who isn't around yet, is down to substitute, and we've also got an apology from Councillor Barnacle.
Okay, are there any further apologies? Any declarations of interest? Okay.
Yeah, a declaration of non-financial declaration of interest in 5.1, as I was the chair of the IJB Audit Performance Committee at the time of the annual report, and I signed it off.
Thank you.
And non-financial declaration of interest in item 5 on the agenda.
Thanks.
And similar non-financial interest in item 5 on the agenda.
Thank you. Okay, can we agree the minutes of the Scrutiny Committee of the 12th of September? Okay. Okay, I'll hand over to Councillor McCall now for the update from Live Active Leisure.
Thank you, Convener. Well, we've been here before. Like Councillor Grant, I would like to welcome both Derek and Paul to the committee, or David and Paul to the committee. It's Lisa's fault because she was talking about Derek Longmuir. Yes, I think there was a bit of memory there perhaps. However, thank you both for attending again here today, and I'll hand the floor open to you to give us your update, and then we'll open the session to questions and comments from the rest of the committee.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to attend the meeting this afternoon. Just really wanted to say that Mike Robinson, who is the company chairman, does send his apologies for not being able to attend today. He has his day job commitments, but as has been said, delighted to have David Longmuir with us, representing the company's board. I thought I would take a few minutes, as it has been some time, as Grant said, in terms of Live Active Leisure has had a change of chief executive. I thought to kick things off, I would very briefly provide a little bit of background to myself as a way of introduction. I have worked in the leisure industry now for over 25 years. Prior to this, I worked for a number of years in analytical chemistry, so a bit of a departure. But I realised after a number of years of work and study that chemistry was definitely not going to be my life career or pursuit. And whilst on a career break abroad, I ended up swim teaching and lifeguarding. So when I returned home, which was Midlothian at that point in time, I looked at what was available in sport and leisure locally, and applied and was successful in getting a part-time leisure assistance position in a newly opened sports facility. That was it for me. It was one of these light bulb moments. I loved the job, loved working with people, and the positive impact that we were able to make on people's lives and their health. Over the course of the years that followed, I've been probably most of the jobs within the industry. I've been a gym instructor, I've been a tennis coach, a very bad tennis coach, but I have been a tennis coach, a football coach, a lifeguard teacher prior to moving into the management. And then I worked as an area manager for a number of years prior to my move to Perth, just over 13 years ago, when I was successful in getting the manager's position at Wells Sports Centre. Following that, I moved into the head of operations position. From a personal perspective, I have 2 teenage children who are at Perth Academy, a girl and a boy, both who have been involved in club football for a number of years. So I've spent many weekends over many of years traipsing around the best football pitches in Scotland. So really what I'm saying is I'm fully invested in all aspects of what we do. My view now is, as it was then, that it's an absolute privilege to work in this industry where we overwhelmingly have the opportunity to make a positive difference and impact on all of our customers. Equally, it is a privilege to be in the position of chief executive, representing the staff and the services we deliver. The vision of the company is to be the provider of choice in Perth and Kinross for everyone to live active lives. That vision remains. But moving forward, we will seek to improve the connections and collaboration between venues, wellbeing, community sport and active school teams, strengthening the overall network and the links between them. This collaborative approach will also continue to be evident in our engagement with other stakeholders and partners. Before I hand over to David, I just want to say that we have previously issued the company's achievement report, and additionally today I've issued some supplementary information, some of which we will talk about during the course of the presentation. But if anybody would like to catch up on any aspect of the information we've provided outside of this group, then of course I'll be more than happy to do this.
Thank you, Paul. I thought it would be a good way to introduce the changes that have been made to Live Active in terms of our governance and management structure, and I can do that independently of Paul and give him the praise that we as an organisation duly want to do. The transition from Jim Moyes to Paul was well signposted, which made the change smooth and very logical for us. We've always operated with effective succession planning, robust governance from the board, which made the key changes to the management team and to our chief executive non-disruptive. And our committee structure, details of which are contained in the pack, helped us focus on what are our key priorities. Succession planning will always be key to the future so that we can utilise the experience we have in the organisation and provide personal development opportunities within the organisation itself. The senior management team has been restructured to meet the needs of the business, and the attached structure charts that you'll find in your pack highlight some of the core functions and the committee governance structure, which helps oversee and govern the effectiveness of those teams. Each team is delivering against our business plan with a very diverse range of financial, health and social objectives. And we will continually, ruthlessly focus on the quality and range of our key services and products. We'll also continue to recruit trustees with the appropriate experience and skills, as evidenced by the 3 new trustees that we brought on this year, both with relevant experience: David McElhose, Ian Collins and Lindsay Scott, providing different backgrounds of expertise that the company needs. And we're delighted to have volunteer directors who are willing to come forward and support the organisation. These changes have been made, however, against a backdrop of efficiency requirements and balancing that against the delivery of the services that we provide. We also strive to maintain our position as an employer of choice within the community, and we support over 390 jobs. This has been challenging given the constraints we've been faced with, and we've also had to manage the ownership and maintenance of some of our key iconic assets such as Bell Sports Centre, Dewar Centre, Perth Leisure Pool and Rodney, just to name but a few. We're also a voluntary living wage employer. We're also about to make and undertake some changes in the sales and marketing department, which have all been achieved within budget and within the current teams as well. So all in all, we are made the relevant changes this year. Paul's our new CEO, and between him and the group of senior management employees that we have within Live Active, we have 120 years plus of experience in the industry and in the organisation, going right back to the days when it was launched under the auspices of Bell Sports Centre. So I'll hand back to Paul just to give you a little bit of progress financially.
Okay, thanks David, and also just to note my appreciation of the support that I've received from David and the rest of the board. Okay, I will briefly touch on the company's financial performance, and unfortunately it's been a challenging year so far. Financial targets that we set become ever more challenging when there are unpredicted events, and there have been a couple of note this year. The unseasonably temperate spring and summer, which we all enjoyed, regrettably has impacted participation across all sites. And to a lesser degree, but still significantly, the unplanned closure of the flumes at Perth Leisure Pool at the very start of the summer and going into the summer period has also been particularly unhelpful. The collective impact means we are currently 2% behind income target, which equates to approximately £120,000 behind budget. Performance of the catering outlets that we operate at Bells and Perth Leisure Pool have also had a difficult year so far. The combination of a dip in attendances at the venues translates, of course, to a dip in attendance in the cafes. Added to this, rising food costs, adoption of the voluntary living wage have all made it a pretty tough trading year to date. Additionally, Jewess Centre continues to be affected by a decline in demand for meeting room space. And whilst there has been a significant investment over the course of the year in improving our offer and increased marketing activity of the venue, this continues to be an area that is challenging. A catering review is currently in progress to determine the way forward in these areas. It goes without saying that obviously we continue to proactively monitor performance as we seek to address the overall shortfall through improved income generation and expenditure control. More positively, the company's membership scheme continues to grow in popularity, and there's a further 3% increase this year. To maximise the opportunities in memberships offer, we have recently appointed our very first dedicated sales advisor, which we are confident will produce a positive return and will improve the retention and communication with existing and new customers. The Live Active Leisure Community Swimming Lesson Programme also continues to be a success. The group lesson programme now provides instruction to over 2,200 children, delivering almost 400 lessons per week across the 5 pools in Perth Kinross. Over the course of this financial year, a new aquatic strategy will be delivered in partnership with Scottish Swimming, which will further develop and provide improved opportunities for our communities. The Community Sport and Active Schools functions transferred from the Council in April 2016, and despite a £50,000 budget reduction to sports development, which was approved in February 16 but realised this year, I am pleased to confirm that the company have managed to not only retain but to grow the team through innovative working and blended funding arrangements with other key stakeholders. A recent example of the innovative approach that we are taking in this area is seen as working with the Scottish Football Association on an opportunity that was presented to us for funding towards a football development officer position. However, there was a requirement for Live Active Leisure to match fund. On the face of it, this looked like it might be an unacceptable financial pressure for Live Active Leisure, despite the obvious development benefits. But through negotiation with the SFA and the development of a robust business case, we have created a hybrid position which will combine sports development and support for clubs, but will also seek to introduce new programmes and football opportunities both in the community and in our venues. Income generated from these new business streams will be used to offset the financial pressure. I believe this is a great example of how we are working innovatively to ensure that opportunities are embraced, but recognising that the delivery and focus of traditional development posts may need to adapt moving forward to reflect the very challenging economic climate we are working in. A further positive example of the work the community sport team have achieved is the relaunch of the PACES Club Accreditation Scheme. This revised scheme now provides an online portal providing essential support, guidance and resource for all the clubs in our communities to operate safely and effectively. The development of the community sports hubs throughout the area, providing the opportunity for clubs to come together with a collective goal to increase participation and develop shared community-led objectives. This year has seen the target of 12 sports hubs being achieved, and the annual achievement reports detail some of the excellent work that has been delivered in our communities by these sports hubs. The success of this project, which initially led by a single member of staff, has resulted in securing increased funding from Sports Scotland for additional support, such as its success. The active schools teams also continue to drive participation levels within schools, and this year have been successful in delivering a further 3% increase in activity levels, with 964 volunteers delivering extracurricular school sport. Of these, a third were young people supported by the active schools team. The current partnership agreement between Sports Scotland and Perth Kinross Council, which funds the community sports hubs and active schools teams, is due to finish at the end of this financial year. But the current and ongoing discussions involving ourselves, the Council and Sports Scotland indicate at this stage that a new 4-year agreement will be offered. This is an overwhelming sign of confidence, support and recognition of the excellent work that has been achieved by all involved. It's not just relationships with the National Agency for Sport that is crucial. We also continue to engage with all relevant national governing bodies and have a calendar of meetings with key officials in these organisations. Not only to ensure that sporting pathways and local clubs are supported, but also to ensure that Live Active Leisure venues continue to be the choice for the delivery of the many regional and national events each year, particularly at the Bells and Jewess centres. The benefits of these, which are not only in relation to sport, but also the wider economic impact and profile that they bring to the area. And as an example, I recently attended the World Bowls tournament at Jewess Centre, which was a couple of weeks ago. The whole event was televised live on BBC Two, and I understand from the organiser that there wasn't a hotel room to be had over the course of the week, such was the demand. hand you back to David now, who'll give a bit of an update in terms of marketing.
Thanks, Paul. We thought it might be a good opportunity just to give you a bit of an insight into the way we've developed the brand and the way that we market Live Active Leisure. And we use a very subtle principle which is adopted throughout the industry. Most of the FTSE top 100 companies who are involved in consumer services or products use this principle. And it's basically a 4A's principle. And very briefly, the 4A's constitute the available market that we have, those who are acceptors, those who are adopters, and those who are adorers. Now, this might sound a bit marketing jargon, but the available market that we have is the whole of Perthshire and Perth Kinross and beyond. It's basically a national market. And the tactics that we deploy for that particular group of target market is awareness, generating awareness through advertising and using all the techniques that any company would use to do that. Acceptors are people who know about Live Active, know what it is, but don't necessarily use us. So they're aware of what the premises are, some of the iconic buildings, and they tend to be aware of what goes on inside them, but they've not yet stepped through the door. Adopters are those who use Live Active premises and are using our facilities and using some of the clubs and sport that we provide as part of a wide range of other sports that they're involved in. I personally play golf, but I'm also curl and bowl from time to time, so I'm kind of an adopter. And then we've got the adorers, those who use Live Active predominantly for all their sporting well-being needs as required. And we deploy different tactics to meet each of those categories. So awareness for the availables, trial for those who are acceptors but not yet given it a go, loyalty for those who use the facilities but have not yet committed to a full long-term programme of support from sport, etc. And those who are adorers, and we tend to classify them as ambassadors for the company and the ones who we really look after as best as we possibly can. We've also segmented our product offering to meet the challenging demands, and we've developed some innovation into our activity-based brands. This little booklet called Our Brand highlights some of the different sub-brands that we use: Live Active Sport, Live Active Boost, Go Play, Live Active Wellbeing, Live Active Steps, Live Active Fun, Live Active Energy. So we really have developed a sub-brand for every aspect of sport, health and well-being throughout anyone's life. And our motto, which we are contemplating using from now on, will be to start active, to stay active and to live active. We're also improving the way that we market ourselves through digital strategies, etc., email, Facebook and all the other combinations. We've also developed our market into the corporate one, where we now have Live Active Rewards, where 80 businesses have signed up to offer deals and promotions to our customers. We also offer a corporate membership scheme where companies who don't have the luxury of providing their staff with sporting facilities, we want them to choose Live Active as the preferred supplier so that they can offer their staff something in the sporting and health environment. We have Live Active Perks, which is rewards to employers and staff. We're just about to introduce our 12 Days of Christmas promotion, which gets people into sport, and there will be some hooks and prizes from some of our partners just to create a bit of excitement about getting healthy and being fit into the festive period. We also have a 12-week taster programme, which we think people have, in previous years has been very successful, and people have signed up to it. The trick is, of course, and the ambition is to keep it going after New Year and after Christmas, so that people have a full annual programme of support to achieve all their health and fitness needs. As I say, we do member welcome emails, we do news and updates on timings and closures for all the various reasons. We've automated our payment system into a more seamless process, which gives people the ability to spread the cost and also do it from a laptop, tablet, etc. Our annual achievement report, which I believe you all have copies of, from about page 18 onwards, you'll see some of the big numbers along the bottom in terms of overall usages, and sessions that we put on and create and give you a sort of a flavour of the positive impact that we're making across the region within our venues. We've recently commissioned our second half of the year customer feedback survey, which we were delighted to receive 443 responses, and of those 443 responses, 87% were either satisfied or completely satisfied with their experience in the last 6 months. And we'll continue to speak to our customers on a regular basis so that we know and we can adapt our offering to suit the changing needs of the market and the requirements. So it's just a potted insight. A lot of the figures and information are contained in the pack, including the Live Active Leisure Opportunities one, where we talk about partnering with local organisations and sponsoring events or some of our programmes, even to the point of allowing advertising in some of our major buildings as well. So just a flavour of where we are with the marketing side. We are about to recruit 2 new positions within budget to support the ongoing ambitions to we are in a competitive market, as you know. Private gyms and budget gyms are out there. We have to compete. We have to have the best possible equipment to make sure that we are cutting edge and leading the way. But the one thing that strikes me and all the fellow trustees, the quality of our staff is the thing that makes the biggest difference. When you're on a fitness or a sporting journey, to have the support from experts in their chosen field is absolutely crucial. And we do it in a way that takes them from any age between 0 to 5 right through to the well-being support that we deliver when people are slightly less active. And again, finish off with our motto, start active, stay active, and live active. Back to Paul.
I have to say that probably the area of communication is undoubtedly the biggest area of change in our industry over the last 20 years. And, you know, the nature of it, you know, the use of printed press compared to what it was, the fact that we're training staff on social media, which, as everybody knows, is an absolutely dynamic forum to make sure that we're engaging with people. So it's been the biggest shift, certainly in the time I've been in the industry, more so probably even than the actual changes in some of the activities that are on offer in the industry. I think some of those go with trends and phases, but broadly, you know, a lot of the activities that we have now are very similar. Similar to the last 15, 20 years. So communications undoubtedly will continue to increase in terms of the time that we will spend on it and how we develop that. So just to briefly wrap things up, and I can't not mention PH2O, our vision for the delivery of PH2O project, which of course remains the single largest business objective we have, and we continue to closely and jointly work with your senior officials towards progressing the realisation of this venue. The jointly commissioned market reappraisal is due to be finalised over the course of the next few weeks, and we remain optimistic that it will be received the appropriate consideration in the new year. The importance of this project to LAL's business, the Council as Commissioner of Services, and our community's well-being, attractiveness and wider economy can't be stressed enough. Bell Sports Centre, our other flagship venue in Perth City, is also an ageing building. However, I do think it looks rejuvenated and resplendent with its new roof on time and on budget, I should add. One of the very positive things about having a nice temperate summer was that was achieved without issue. But it will require investment moving forward to ensure it continues to attract the broad range of customers that attend currently. And on this I can confirm that we are currently in discussions with the Ganniku Trust regarding a feasibility study to be undertaken to consider the future development and investment needs of the venue. Additionally, and continuing the theme of collaborative working, Live Active Leisure and Perthshire Rugby Club have been working together over the course of this year to develop a new and shared strength and conditioning gym. I can confirm that this project will move forward in the new year and will be based in Bell Sports Centre and will provide a quality training environment for both club athletes and the wider community. And finally, the cost of delivering services across such a diverse and largely rural area is increasingly challenging, and the value of agreeing the arrangements and securing the future of sport and leisure services throughout Perth and Kinross is absolutely crucial. And therefore, in the new year, it is my intention, in partnership with the Council, to commission a wider strategic business review, looking at the facilities, the services and activities we offer, to really consider the anticipated economic environment moving forward, to scenario plan on that basis, to identify opportunities to improve service delivery, organisational efficiency, and potentially different models of delivery. This study will enable more effective planning for the future to ensure the shared strategic objectives of Live Active Leisure and Perth Kinross Council are achieved. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul and David. That was very interesting and very informative. I particularly have some empathy with the ambition to stay active after Christmas. I hope I'm not the only person in here that finds that a bit of a challenge. So I'd like now to open up the floor to any questions. Councillor Dugan.
Thanks very much, Vice Convener, and thank you for the presentations. I noticed that the update, such as it was on PH2, was very light, and I think we all understand why that is. I wish we were sitting here talking about the moving forward to a construction phase, but that's sadly not to be for the time being. Earlier on in the presentation, though, there was a discussion about unplanned maintenance at Perth Leisure Pool. Can I ask what this runs to, and is Live Active Leisure at risk now with that ageing facility of throwing good money after bad, keeping it lumbering forward when it should be getting replaced?
Thank you, Councillor Dugan.
Obviously, this is an area we've discussed at length before. It is an ageing building, it is over 30 years old, and obviously it's quite harsh operating conditions, not only in terms of the heat, but obviously the chlorinated and chemicaled air that it works in. We are proactively managing the facility to make sure it's safe and fit for purpose, but I'll go back to the fact is that it's a building now that's over 30 years of age. We have recently, our Property Environment Committee has recently authorised a further spend in terms of more intrusive condition surveys, which will be getting commissioned over the next few months. There'll be a significant cost to that, but obviously we need to understand very clearly what the demands of the building are going to be over the next few years. As you quite rightly say, we don't unfortunately have at this time a venue date on the horizon, and therefore we've got a plan on that basis. So we need to do the condition surveys, we need to understand what the short and medium term requirements are of the building, and then we'll have to take it further forward from that perspective.
Thank you, Paul. Supplementary.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Convener. It's just to find out if, as experts in the industry, either of our members of the Live Active Board are aware of another leisure pool on the scale of PH2 that's been funded somewhere in Scotland without any funding coming from the local authority.
I wouldn't necessarily set myself as an expert in terms of that. However, I know of no other venue of this type that has that arrangement, no.
Thank you. I have a sort of supplementary to that. In your experience, what is the optimal working life of a pool such as Perth Leisure Pool?
I would anticipate that 30 years is probably what one would expect. I mean, obviously you can go through different phases of refurbishment in that period, and I think that's one of the challenges we have, is that because obviously this project's now been ongoing for the best part of a decade, is that the planned refurbishment phases that you might anticipate if you were trying to improve the longevity of a building haven't happened because we've been trying to avoid abortive spends. So we are at that point. I think we all recognise that. As I say, for us now, we have a business to manage, we have customers, we need income, we need to retain. We know that the competition has increased. We know that there's new venues in neighbouring trusts. What we have to do now is concentrate where we can, which is making sure that the building is fit and suitable for our customers coming forward, so we continue to attract people to the venue. And the intrusive condition surveys that we'll get will provide us at least a steer in terms of what the investment requirements will be for the next 5 years.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor McEwen.
Thank you, Vice Convener. It's probably difficult for me to come to committee with Live Active Leisure and not mention Blairgowrie. Recently handed in a petition to the leader of the council to change the funding for the recreation centre, and we'll see how that develops going forward. Looking at the information you've given us, that Live Active Leisure is on track to meet your headline targets of participants going to your centres. That was in the main email that we got. And the booklet that you've given us today, it actually goes into the swim figures, in which the usage of the pools is quite poor. For me, in Blairgowrie, the usage of 14.5% to me represents a building that people don't want to use because it's old and tired and needs replaced. And what I'm questioning here is that your increase is related to fitness classes and not to the swimming. So you know, the lack of investment in PH2O, the lack of investment in Blairgowrie is basically making your job more difficult. And also looking at the Blairgowrie plans as they currently stand, fitness rooms are actually getting taken away from the redesign of that as well. So that actually your growth area is actually having facilities removed from it as well within the Blairgowrie plans. So I'd just like a general comment from yourself that how important these infrastructure things are for you, and what is obviously a moving demographic, moving usage, and that your actual pure usage is down to facilities. And you mentioned equipment earlier.
Mm-hmm. I'll start with the pools. Our pool usage is down. Our pools do get hit by the weather quite substantially, and that is a significant factor this year. Unfortunately, you know, when it's nice weather, the last place people tend to go is to a swimming pool, and that's something we will pray for rain most summers as a staff team, apart from maybe that week we're off. So it's a challenge that we have to face. But of course, a new environment is always going to be attractive. Blairgowrie, for us, since we've taken over the management, has been a real success for us in terms of usage and in terms of engagement with the community on a year-by-year basis. But it's an old design, and so therefore it has limitations in the flexible use of the venue. So in terms of going forward, we welcome a new venue, and what we always seek to have is flexibility in terms of the space and the layout and the design of the venue, because that allows us to maximize the community use, as well as obviously making sure that the school use during the day is available. So we welcome that. Fitness classes have been the big trend growth in the last few years. Fitness suites are still there, fitness gyms are still there, but they've probably had a single-digit drop-off in some ways in terms of usage, and what has grown is fitness, group fitness. And we have invested significantly in that area, and we have taken on internationally recognized group fitness programs, which provide an amazing standard of quality in terms of changing music every 3 months, changing routines, updating staff training. So it's been a complete culture shift in terms of group fitness, which now provides a much better experience than it ever has done. And that's been the general trend across the whole of the UK. So yes, we absolutely welcome any new facility, because it's always going to stimulate interest and increase usage. But for us, it's about making sure that what we have is flexibility.
Thank you. Supplementary?
In my research around the Blairgowrie swimming facilities, a number of lanes and lengths of pools and all these type of things, you know, there's a Swim Scotland report that ranks all the council areas for their actual provision of swim facilities. And Perth Kinross is virtually right down the bottom of that list. Do you as an organisation have an ambition to actually bring Perth Kinross up that list, so that on a council-wide basis we actually do provide proper swim facilities to the people of Perth Kinross?
Of course, is the answer. And again, I probably revert back. As you know, that the current pool is a 20-metre pool, for example. So obviously that fails to meet a lot of the requirements from a swimming club perspective, to hosting galas and that type of thing. So obviously an improvement to a 25-metre is going to be brilliant and make a big difference. The size and the width of the pool then, again, for me, it comes to this practicalities there. You want flexibility, and obviously it goes without saying that the larger or the wider that your pool is, the more options that you have in terms of splitting up that pool tank to make sure that you can provide flexible arrangements for a number of different customer groups. So for me, it's, you know, that's why you have that. That's why you want that flexibility.
Any other questions? Councillor Parrott and then Councillor Stewart.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think you've outlined a very good number of positive initiatives and proactive working with partners. One figure in the pack, though, that attracts my attention is the 2 outdoor centres at Blackwater and Kinlochranach. Yes. And they appear to be, if you like, an asset that at the moment is significantly underused. And I wonder whether you have any scope for seeking partners for those 2 centres in terms of increasing their usage and increasing, if you like, the benefit locally, but perhaps wider benefits provided by a business partner that can contribute financially to the bottom line? Thank you.
Yes, that is possible, and we certainly have been, I know for certain that we've been in touch with Kinlochranach Community Trust, for example, in terms of promoting, and obviously they've got a key objective there in terms of promoting the area, and we are working with partnership with them in terms of the Kinlochranach facility. Yes, our performance in terms of the outdoor centres, whilst the first year I think saw an increase in the occupancy, has remained rather static and has dropped down at Blackwater, I think, over the course of the last 12 months. It's a challenging area. There are a number of other establishments, and so there has been some investment which has been made by the council over the course of the last 24 months to improve the venues. We actively try and promote activities as part of the package. There's two reasons why people use these facilities. One is that they just wish to use it almost as a bunkhouse, as somewhere where they can stay, and then they're self-packaged, they're going out and doing their own walks, they're going skiing. The second is as part of something that we provide as a package. So we've been developing both of these over the course of the last 12 months, but it is still quite challenging. So yes, I think there is an option or a possibility of potentially liaising closer with somebody else to try and maximise the occupancy of them.
Could I just support that response? I've recently met with an organisation at their Droy Centre down in Loch Lomond who have very, very similar facilities to the ones at Blackwater and Lochranach, and they've been very, very innovative in collaborating with local authorities and private individuals. The centres are mainly used to help young people who have had a bad start in life, and they're giving them a chance to do team building and various other things, and embrace people who have maybe been excluded from school or in other ways had a really rough time. And we met with them recently, and I'm just about to connect the two organisations with our own to see if there's any way that we can look at the best practice that I think they're using at the moment. So I think that would be something worth pursuing.
Thank you, Raj.
Thanks, Vice Convener. It was to follow, just out of curiosity, to follow up on a point in your annual achievement report about the number of users of the Live Active Rewards app. 955 out of the total number of Live Active members seemed small, but is that because it's only relates to the corporate partnership members, and should the app be more widely available, I wonder? Sorry, that's a bit unfair. Page 28 of your annual achievement report talks about the use of the app and the Live Active Rewards scheme.
I'm happy to double check that, but I think it's more likely that it was a newly introduced, and that's why the number's lower than one might expect. So I think at that point the document was published, I think it was a new product for us, but I'm happy to double check that figure.
I can add a little to that, in that it is a very new development for us to move into the app arena. One of the things that we're looking at is to have what we call the push app, where the minute you step into one of our, this is for further down the line, but one of the ambitions for our app is the minute you step into one of our centres or activity venues, you will receive a push notification on your phone, and you really then become immersed in that venue, and it will give you class times, it will give you pricing, it will give you what's on that day, what's available. So we're trying to develop the technology behind that. It's quite expensive. It's an development of an app, and then creating the awareness of it and getting it out there and getting it used does take a bit of time. But we're very mindful of the need to embrace that part of technology, and hopefully next year we'll see some bigger numbers on that one.
Thank you.
Sorry, there was just something like the board of Live Active are totally committed to the principles that lay behind the PH2 project. It was a spend to save project, and we were all, I think I don't want to go over old ground, but we were disappointed with the decisions and the balancing against other priorities, but we are still committed to it, and we wish that commitment to be shared, and we want to collaborate. And I know that there's work going ahead to reevaluate, and there's a business case being put together as to what it might look like in the future. But we do believe that we need to get that back on track as quickly as possible so that we can re-energise that whole area. It was a spend to save project. Yes, there was going to have to be borrowing, but the payback was going to be significant, and not just the payback financially, the payback in terms of putting sport and a sporting venue back on the, not just the local map, but the national map. Because if you remember when Dewar Centre was first created in Perth Leisure Pool, it was the best that you could go to. It attracted a lot of people from outside the community, and I think we would like to get back to that impetus behind it. Your support across that would be most appreciated, and I know that you are working together now, but the board of Live Active are totally committed to making this happen. Final point, just to give you something to think about, I'm not sure if the Festival of, if this is the right place to bring this up, but if the Festival of Light is going to be happening again, perhaps we could think about creating something really dynamic around the dome of Bell Sports Centre to highlight the new roof, the 50th anniversary. It's one of the most iconic buildings in the community. If we could do something with laser technology, lighting technology, to have something on the roof of Bell Sports Centre, I think it would create huge impact and awareness around the community. That's it, thanks.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points through the presentation and the question and answers. First is my surprise and sadness that in terms of the Swim Scotland report, or ranking, that Perth and Kinross is so far down that list. I'm old enough to actually remember when Bell Sports Centre was opened, but also when the Leisure Pool and the Dewar Centre were both opened, and how what a transformation they were. And in fact, before they even opened, particularly around the swimming pool, that there was insufficient capacity because the old pool had been an old building, hadn't been developed, hadn't been looked after, and as a consequence, the swimming pool alone was oversubscribed almost from the beginning. And similarly with the Dewar Centre. So I think certainly on a personal level, I'm very supportive of the PH2O project, as I know many of my colleagues are here, and I'm quite sure that work will continue to achieve that, hopefully in the long run. I did want to ask you one particular question around the Dewar Centre. You mentioned that there is a decline in the uptake of its use. Is that across all factors of the Dewar Centre or particular sectors of it, and what impact might that be if this is a long-term trend?
The impact is really in relation to meeting room space. Obviously, meeting rooms aren't part of the longer-term PH2O project, so I suppose that's a positive thing. It impacts just in terms of, obviously, it's part of our trading company, and that gift aids back into our wider charity. So it's challenging in terms of it's creating an additional pressure. And also, if you don't have the same meeting space, you don't obviously have the same catering income. So it's a bit of a double whammy in terms of that. So the intelligence we have, and as I say, we've invested quite a lot of time, a bit of money, we've improved the offer, we've significantly increased the amount of marketing activity, we've engaged with websites that in terms of Perth meeting space, but it continues to be rather challenging for us. So it's not so much the conferences. The large conferences, we still seem to be picking up, and obviously in terms of our sporting activity, we're still retaining the levels of activity in that. So it seems to be very much around meeting room space. I think a lot of companies over the last few years have started to develop and use their own spaces, is what the intelligence that we're getting back. So not only are there other providers in Perth, but actually a lot of companies now have managed to find space within their own organisations rather than going out to external companies.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? No? Oh, Councillor Parrott.
Thank you very much. Just something that's occurred to me. It's delightful to see the recent success of the Scottish teams at Tallinn in the curling. I just wondered, with regard to that, whether the new curling centre at Stirling, has that impacted on curling in Perth at all? And are we going to, or has it, if you like, taken up, is there new demand and we can still maximise curling in Perth, or are we going, because of the new centre at Stirling, are we going to have to be looking at new things with a lesser presence for curling? Thank you.
We have seen some impact in terms of team training, but not substantially. And actually, we still managed to retain the events that we had anticipated we may lose to Stirling, so we still managed to retain them this year. We have an outstanding quality of ice in Dewars. We have the legacy, we have the history, and actually we produce outstanding international quality ice. And it continues to be attractive for events coming. So we haven't seen a significant, in any way, drop-off in terms of the curling that we're attracting.
Good, thanks. Could I just add this bit about the bowling? As a former internationalist myself, playing indoor bowls for many, many years, when the Dewars Centre opened and when the first jack was thrown, we had 1,100 playing members of the indoor bowling sector. We now have something in the region of 350, mainly propped up by our senior members. However, bowling is one of the few sports that's actually attracting a lot of investment from Sports Scotland because we deliver at every Commonwealth Games, at every World Championship. It's a sport that seems to be, we're very good at it. We have international World Championships in Scotland. We host the major Scottish Masters event, which is very, 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 very successful for the centre. But it's like every other sport at the moment, and I have the same challenges within golf, reducing numbers, people not willing to be part of a membership club type atmosphere. People are now prepared to pay and play and go where they want. So there's something around indoor bowling as well that could be done to give it a bit of a lift, because it's a huge space and it's a huge cost to have that space. And if you're only running one session in the evening, it doesn't necessarily make it viable, but it is a provision of a sport that is lifelong in terms of its age profile. And it's also a sport that Scotland does particularly well in. And I would love to see bowling having a bit of a resurgence in the local community.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you again for your visit to us and your very open and frank report to us. That was very informative. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My apologies. Comments other than questions?
Thank you, David. Sorry. We get Live Active at Scrutiny regularly. Obviously, they're on a schedule. And I think it would be remiss of councillors, both in this committee and elsewhere in the council, to overlook that which Live Active deliver. Such is the quality of their offer in Perth and Kinross, it's hard to decipher whether it's the health and well-being benefits, whether it's the employability benefits, or whether it's the amenity benefits that they apply right across the region. And it's worth pointing out in difficult times that if any of our other colleagues are looking for the benchmark of how we expect an ALIO to function, they don't need to look any further than the way that Live Active operates.
Thank you, Councillor Duggan. I would totally agree with that statement. Oh.
Actually, having said all that, I would be open to a private discussion about the advert they put up at the end of Riggs Road recently, which would probably not want to be repeated.
Well, I'll take your word on that, Councillor Duggan, and we shall leave it at that.
Thanks. You do realise everybody will be running along Riggs Road now to have a look at this advert.
Of course, it is actually Fuse Road, and it's gone. But it's,
there'll be another traffic jam in Perth.
Convener. So if I could just take a moment to present my apologies to you and the members and the officers for my late arrival. I'm substituting for Councillor Harry Coates, and I hadn't appreciated the change of time. Apologies.
It's perfectly fine, John. We guessed that, so thanks for substituting for him anyway. Okay, we'll move on to...
It's easier for you.
No,
You're like...
Are you quite happy sitting there, Robert, or do you want to move over? And you could use one of these microphones, which probably work more effectively as well. Dan, do you want to? No, but if you wanted to just take that, yeah, because these saves us having the problem with the handheld mics. Thanks. Okay, thanks. Thanks for coming along. As we move on to paper 5, which is for the paper on the Perth and Kinross Health and Social Care Partnership. This is the annual report, performance report for 2017-18 for the Perth and Kinross Health and Social Care Partnership. It's already been in front of the IGB Audit and Performance Committee in July, and I'll get Rob Packham, the Chief Officer, will speak to the report and introduce it. I myself found it really interesting report. A lot of work, good work completed, and a lot to be done. I did, however, have to say, and you can disavow me of my views possibly, that there's little evidence of outcomes and no results in the report. It seems to be very aspirational, etc. So with that, I'll hand over to Rob to talk us through it.
Thank you, Convener. Just if I could make a connection to the last presentation as we begin. Bowling is one of the best things you can do for older people. And one of the things we have in Perth and Kinross is a rising population of older folk. And you'll see within the profile of the annual report a huge emphasis on the changes that we're seeking to make in order to address the changes in our population. So the annual report is required of us by the Scottish Government. In addition to it having been to the Audit and Performance Committee of the IJB, it's also been presented to the NHS Tayside Board, where it was accepted and commended. The report covers the basic ambitions of our strategic plan, and it has to relate to the 9 health and well-being outcomes which are required of all partnerships in Scotland, and these are detailed at Appendix 1 in the document. We have in front of us today the second annual report, and this is for a very young organisation that is bringing together health and care services around the needs of the population in Perth and Kinross. And our ambition is to make a meaningful difference to the lives of people and to improve outcomes. So your reference, Convener, to the importance of ensuring that outcomes are properly reflected is a very important point and not lost on us. The data that has fed this report has come from a number of sources. And one of the reasons why we may be light on outcome data is that community data on outcomes is light. So for both health and care outcomes, the measures are not fully defined in all areas of our work. The mechanisms by which that data would be captured is hugely variable. And if we consider even the electronic data systems of the Council and the Health Board, they don't necessarily fit together just as yet. We have many systems that rely on paper recording, and therefore bringing that to a single place is quite a challenge. However, we have recognized the need to improve this, and in our work that we're doing at the moment, we've identified 4 programs of care, and for each of the programs of care, which will be described, one of the challenges for each of those strategic planning programs is that they will define their outcomes, they will define their key performance indicators, and that in future we will report on that more regularly. It is also true to say that when we're dealing with individual people and we're dealing with issues of quality of life, these factors do not always lend themselves to quantitative measures. And therefore, both in health and care, academically across the world, there is a recognition that qualitative data has value. And there is, in the health service in particular, been an emphasis on patient experience, and we could say the same for our social care work as well. And obviously the use of story to illustrate the way in which services actually work for people. So in the way that this document is formed, there is a deliberate attempt to bring the reality of story to the fore so that people can get a real flavour of what those services feel like as from the point of view of people who are actually consuming what we produce. So in the document you will see 2 things really. You'll see first of all what we believe we've achieved in our 2.5 years of existence. This does not preclude, of course, much of the very good work that went on before the partnership was formed, and in fact we're building on some excellent work that was already in place here in Perth and Kinross. The partnership has three roles. It obviously has to keep services going in real time for people. It is trying and aiming to redesign a new future so that health and care will be delivered in ways that are more appropriate for the population that is emerging in Perth and Kinross. But the truth is also that we are dealing with a system that has had a past. And so therefore some of our time has been taken up in this last 2 years with dealing with issues that have been with us in Perth and Kinross and across the wider elements of Tayside for some time. The partnership is responsible for a very wide range of services: hospitals, community care, long-term care, complex care, a whole range of different services that we host on behalf of NHS Tayside, and some of them with some very particular challenges. For example, the prison, where at the moment we're seeing an expanding population of prisoners, some of whom have extremely significant needs. Something like 83% of the prison population are dealing with some sort of a substance issue, and many of them, something like 56% of them are dealing with issues of mental health or learning disability. The population profile in P&K is aging. You're seeing, again, reflected the fact that people are living longer at home. This is a success story. The fact that we are seeing more people living well and independently for longer is a significant success that we can credit in part to the work of the Health and Social Care Partnership. However, at the point when need is expressed, there's an increasing level of complexity that we now have to deal with, and we see this manifest in some of the performance figures where delays to discharge are described, the number of emergency admissions are described. Some of this is quite difficult to tease out. How much of it is to do with the performance of the partnership? How much of it is to do with a naturally aging population? We know from research that much can be done to stave off the inevitable consequences of aging. And we can work very hard to make that happen, but at a certain point, care is required. And again, you will see that within our report, there are issues that describe our limitations on capacity. There are factors that we know we need to improve upon in terms of our rehabilitation approach. We know that we can keep people away from long-term care by making sure they stay as fit as possible for as long as possible. So in the data, you will find that there is narrative. You will also find that there is actual comparative data on a series of prescribed areas. I want to just emphasize the fact that there is the Health and Care Experience Survey that goes on, and part of our comparative data is taken from the wide population. Last year, we reported on the Health and Care Experience Survey alone. This year, we have been very careful to use the same measures for people who are actually using our services. So you will see that any one of us in this room could be asked a question, but we may not actually be users of the service. In this year, we've also asked our service users what they think, and there is a comparative analysis in that. You will see that some of the red and amber and green signs are based on very, very small movements. And there is a question about the statistical significance of this, because the marginal changes are very small, and the degree to which we can rely on these as being accurate would be subject to question if they were more rigorously looked at. I would suggest that in the future we need to be much better at analysing this data, both qualitative and quantitative, and making sure that we are truly seeing a reflection of the issues that matter to people. So in the future, we're needing to do more about reducing inequalities. We know that in certain parts of Perth and Kinross, people are not getting an equal experience of health and care, whether that be by rurality or by socioeconomic reasons. We are blessed in some respects in that we have only 8% of our population who live at or below what's considered the poverty line, compared with 56% in Dundee, a very, very different population indeed. We know we need to do further work on the prevention of admission to either long-term care or to hospital. We know we need to do more on rehabilitation to stem demand. And we know that we need to do even more to drive more integrated working. And this morning, we have seen a discussion around the joint working agreement that will be a building block to having far more integrated working in the future. I would be very happy to answer any questions. I have with me my colleague, Diane Fraser, who I must commend for having done a lion's share of this work. She and her team have done an excellent job. And just to to commend Diane. This work has been cited as extremely good practice. The format of the report in Perth Kinross has been looked at nationally as being exemplar practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Rob. So we'll open up to questions now. David, Councillor Edinburgh.
Thank you, Provost. Oh no, I mean, convener. Could I beg forbearance to ask 3 questions of Mr. Packham?
You can, yes.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to compliment Mr. Packham on the quality of his singing on Sunday night at the
thank you.
Kinross, but get that out of the way first. Right, first question is about on page 6 of the annual performance report, and it's about the implementation of the new care at home contract, which was completed.
Yeah.
You've mentioned a review of the sustainability of the current service model is required. Has that started yet?
Yes. If you wouldn't mind, I'll defer to Diane to give you a much more detailed answer than I can provide.
Yep, of course.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, we have started a review of the whole of care at home provision. So last year we reviewed care at home and our own internal care at home, and we implemented a home assessment recovery team. So we're reviewing that alongside the external provision that we commissioned last year.
Right.
We're due to complete that by the end of this year.
Okay, thank you. The second question relates to page 7 of the page 21 of our papers, and it relates to primary care. It says during 17-18, funding was provided to provide GP capacity to work with us on quality, safe and cost-effective prescribing. Can you tell me what the reasoning was behind this and what the goals were behind that?
I'd be delighted to try and do that for you. Just to explain that GPs are independent practitioners who have liberty to prescribe as they see fit for members of the public. However, the Health and Social Care Partnership is responsible for the drug budget. Therefore, you have a group of GPs who have the license to spend, but they're not necessarily directly accountable to us in the way that their actions impact upon the level of spend in the partnership. Now, this is true across the country. It's not just local to us. So as we began the partnership, there were 2 areas in which the budget for the partnership was considered to be insufficient. One was in the FHS, Family Health Services prescribing, and the second one was in the inpatient mental health services. Now that problem is still with us. Across Perth and Kinross, there's huge variation in the way that GPs prescribe, and that may be appropriate, and it's an extraordinarily difficult thing to describe what is right and what is wrong, and there are many factors that need to be taken into consideration. For instance, you might prescribe at a high level, but that's preventing something that's far more expensive in terms of a secondary care intervention or some other type of long-term commitment to care, for instance. So therefore, if you're going to try and bring into balance the expenditure on drugs in line with the Scottish average, it requires a really careful professional discussion with people to understand, first of all, what the constraining factors are for them as a practice or as an individual practitioner, or to understand their patient population, because obviously different parts of our population may require different things. As people age, they tend to need more drugs, so that makes sense. And people who have mental health issues or long-term conditions will tend to need more drugs. I'm rather hesitant because I know we have a pharmacist in the room. However, what I'm trying to describe here is that we gained agreement in the time when Councillor Dugan was actually the chair of the IJB to 3 years of funding to look at proactively how we could support the practices in Perth and Kinross to get to a closer alignment of budget and spend. Now that we have effected by having conversations with individual practices. Those conversations are easier in some places than in others, and the reasons for those differences need to be explored in great detail before any judgments are made.
Great, thank you. One more, if that's okay. Page 25 of our papers and page 11 of the report. one of the measures in the bottom, in the middle of the table, relates to accident and emergency attendances, which are up slightly. Well, what are your plans to analyse this, and how will that help you understand what's going on? I mean, for example, I think it could be just a quirk of the weather.
Could be.
So
it could be. I mean, there are so many reasons why people go to A&E. However, there would be things that we can do, because there are many people who present at A&E who don't need to be there. Now, that's about the resilience of community services. It's about what's available in, say, minor injuries units, and everybody's been aware of the difficulties we've had with staffing of some of our minor injury units. And then it's about the variation through the week of what services are available. So a GP is not available at the weekend in the main. So you will get Friday night surges, for instance, or times when it's icy, you'll get more people presenting and so forth. However, with more proactive care around, say, respiratory medicine, where many of those people in a crisis might turn up at A&E. If we were doing more in the community, we might be able to prevent more of that. So that's the type of work we're seeking to bring in.
Okay, thank you, Convener.
Thanks, Councillor Parrott.
Thank you very much, Convener. I'm looking also at page 11 and indeed table 1, and I noticed for starters that these are the ministerial strategic group indicators, and that suggests to me that they have, if you like, a macro level purpose for analysis. But it strikes me that for our purposes in understanding things, that they're not perhaps as useful as they might be. And I just wonder whether we do have more data which might be shared. For example, emergency emissions in the current year seems to be about 1 for every 10 people in the population. Mm-hmm. But I'd be interested in knowing, if you like, how many people have more than 10 emergency admissions a year. Well, if you like, where the balance is. How many people don't have an emergency admissions at all? Yeah. Similarly, if you like, for A&E attendances. Yeah. And if I may, a final one on this one. Unscheduled hospital bed days. If my maths is correct, the unscheduled hospital bed days adds up to 280 beds permanently occupied every year. How does that relate to the number of, if you like, scheduled bed days? What is the balance between unscheduled and scheduled? And is there any way that by understanding those unscheduled bed days, they can be driven down?
Thank you. I'm struggling to remember all 3 parts of the question, but perhaps you could just help me. Yeah. So the first one was around emergency admissions.
It's essentially to emergency admissions and A&E attenders. How are they actually more broken down across the whole population, rather than just a bland average?
You are absolutely right that there will be certain categories of people who attend more. So we know that 2% of our population create 50% of our spend. So in other words, we know that there are people who have high levels of demand on the service, and one of our aims is to target them and look at alternative ways of dealing with them so that they don't place quite such the same level of demand on services. There's also an issue around about the fact that A&E will be a place that certain types of people will go, people who have alcohol issues or who are, have mental health issues can turn up at A&E quite a lot as well. So it tends to be that there are certain members of the population who will come multiple times. So it wouldn't be right to consider it just in terms of the population as a whole, but you would need to segment that down into people who have reason to be there, or people who might come there either habitually or because of the nature of their lifestyle. The question you asked then about the unscheduled care balance. Right, well, this is another really interesting question, because we know more about the trends in unscheduled presentations than we know about the trends in scheduled. Now that is illogical, because you would think it would be planned more easily, and it should be, and that's one of the health services intentions of trying to create an elective care centre versus one that is tied between both unscheduled and elective care, if that makes sense. So the number of unscheduled hospital bed days will be a feature of all of these other things we talked about. What sort of resilience is created in communities, what the front door looks like, how we prevent people coming in, and so forth.
If I can just have one more. The first thing, that figure of 2% of the population generating 50% of the spend across the piece, that to me is staggering, very interesting.
That's universal across Scotland.
Right, yeah, that's a figure I didn't know. just if I may, going to page 31, the performance indicators relating to national health wellbeing outcomes, outcome 5. I'm interested in the figure, percentage of households in fuel poverty. This may be very difficult for you to answer, but it's in the papers. I don't understand how the percentage of households in fuel poverty can, if you like, bounce from 38% in 15-16 down to 22% in 16-17 and up to 32% in 17-18. That seems to be an incredible change year on year for something that I would have thought where change would be more gradual over time.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I can't answer the detail of that, but I might be able to. We can certainly come back to you and find out if we can explain that a bit more. But that would, for me, be an indication of deprivation.
Yeah. It could also be to do with the price of fuel.
No, I accept that, but it seems to be a massive change over a short period, which I find difficult to explain either by changing levels in fuel prices or changing levels in income over a one-year period.
Thanks. Councillor Dugan.
Thanks, Convener. A few questions, maybe do first two at once. They're relatively straightforward. I think we all welcomed the paper this morning on the integrated working trial that's going to take place in Perth and Kinross. Can I ask why it's taking this length of time to get to that level of integration ambition? Or is that, have we just got the product of 2.5 years of planning now? And that's the first one. The second one is what progress have we made in terms of meaningful rollout of digitally enabled care?
Right, so for the first one, the approach that's been taken in neighbouring IJBs has been different. We have been very careful to make sure that the responsibilities and rights of an employer are respected. And in seeking to have a joint working agreement, the trade unions in Tayside Health Board were keen that we had an agreement across all three parties. That proved to be extremely difficult to effect. So within the last year, I met with the three chief executives along with Karen Donaldson, and we placed before them the reasoning that Perth and Kinross had proposed, and they were in agreement with the principle. And so it was agreed at that meeting that Perth and Kinross would be the place in which this joint working agreement would be tested. So in frank response to your question, Councillor Dugan, it is delayed due to differences of view. However, this is the right thing to do, and it will enable us to move forward and have safe means of governing our systems and making sure that employees are safe and the professional standards are guarded. Second question, sorry, remind me again, was the digitisation.
Digitally enabled care.
Yeah. Now, again, I'm going to ask Diane to respond to that because we have seen a significant increase in the level of technology-enabled care. Thanks, Diane.
Yes, we presented a strategy to the IJB in relation to digital health and telecare. We also hosted a recent conference which was supported by Scottish Government. So in terms of the work that we're doing, we're certainly piloting telecare and digital telecare, one of 3 pilots across Scotland. And we're now beginning to identify areas where we can begin to target digital health care. So again, maybe supporting doctors who can have digital consultations in particular areas. We're having to work with clinicians in terms of what targeted areas are safe to do so at this stage, but certainly there's an appetite to begin to develop that.
So it sounds from that then, if I could seek clarity, Convener, that it's not actually operational anywhere, that we're still at the conference strategy trialling.
In terms of our digital telecare, that is an operation, and we're currently offering call centre response to 2 other authorities. We're trialling that at the moment, so that is happening. And certainly our response in Perth and Kinross we've had to increase because of the various different types of telecare that we are implementing into people's houses. So absolutely we're using telecare to support people at home. In terms of digital health in acute settings or community hospital settings, that we're beginning to develop that, and that is being tested out.
Okay, convener, thank you. And it's on page 25 of our report, page 11 of the report. It's the MSG indicators again. I suppose to be fair to Mr. Packham, he did mention this himself in his introduction, that the report, however, does say, the paragraph, the top right, says we are making good progress in all of these indicators. When in actual fact, I think an honest assessment would say that we're making good progress in delayed discharge bed days at 12.4%, at reasonable in unscheduled hospital bed days at 8%, but the rest are all marginal, 0.7%, 1.37% and 0.03% for percentage of population at home unsupported. Yeah. So I think one of the concerns that I have about integration is that the narrative, and we heard from Rob about why the qualitative data is much easier to get to than the quantitative data. So, and I accept that, but we need to be really honest with ourselves, because that I would suggest, I'm happy to be corrected, I would suggest that is by no stretch of the imagination good progress.
Thanks, Councillor Dugan. Could you just give the page number again so we can all...
It's page 25 of the report, and it's page 11 of the actual appendix.
Would you like me to comment? Thank you, Councillor Dugan. I mean, I accept what you're saying. This is not new, however. This is something that has been with me as a health service professional for almost as long as I've been working. Behind it is the difficulty of attributing benefit to any particular intervention, and often it's a range of things that have to be brought together to meet the needs of an individual, and that will be very variable depending on the individual's needs. So therefore, to be able to pin down at this point in time what the hard measures are that would help us to really demonstrate the impact of the partnership alone, because we heard earlier from Live Active Leisure, active living is really important. We know that housing is important. We know that education is important. We know that your community resilience is really important. And all of these things to come together. However, I think if we look at what we've managed to achieve in 2 years, just over 2 years, you know, there is significant evidence on an individual case-by-case basis of the fact that the benefits of integration are beginning to demonstrate themselves. The fact that we are at the beginning of a journey is something I would absolutely accept, and I think there's a long way to go. It's taken us almost 3 years to understand what needs to be done and what the key factors are in making the progress that we need to make. And I could summarize that for you now in saying that we need to emphasize a rehabilitative approach to everything that we do. Now, as a rehabilitation professional in my background, you would think that would be blindingly obvious. But actually, it's taken me a while, and it's taken my colleagues a while to understand how the health and care interventions work together for the benefit of a population. And the work that's been done out of Newcastle University that demonstrates what happens to people as they age has been pivotal in helping us to focus on what we need to do. We now need to build the capacity, we now need to change the culture, and we need to help the population themselves understand what they can do for themselves in order to get this to really motor and get some momentum behind it. But I think we're in a very good place to be moving forward from here.
Any other questions? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. I have a couple of questions. I'd like to make a comment first, if I may. I think that, and I would endorse really what the Convener has said at the beginning, that this report is a little bit light in any detail, particularly as it's a performance report. I understand that some of the content is retrospective, but nevertheless there are some... but nevertheless there are some things that could be answered more fully in the report, such as... I'm going to the questions now. On page 20, under mental health and well-being, I can just get to that bit now. I was distracted here by the lady on my right.
This is good. This is good to see that stepping into the shoes of the lady who left this
Yes.
morning.
I know.
It'll be seamless. You will
Right.
Page 6.
So thank you for giving me that little bit of time. On the mental health and wellbeing section and page 20 of our report and page 6 of yours,
Yep.
the changes to the inpatient mental health and the learning disability service, it would be useful to get some update on that and find out exactly what the impact has been, not just on the patients themselves or the users of the services, but also if there's been any increase in emergency admissions or because of accessibility, particularly towards Carse View. And my second question is on page 49 of our report and page 35 of yours around employability services, and whether, again, has there been any improvement to that? Because it is referred to, and I would like to think that perhaps there is some quantitative evidence that could have been included in this report as to how effective that would be.
Okay. So if I might take the first of your questions, and I'll defer the second question to Diane, if that's okay. So colleagues will be aware that the mental health services in Tayside are under significant scrutiny at the moment. There is an independent inquiry going on into the concerns of the public about the way in which that service has been performing. When we came together as a partnership, we inherited from NHS Tayside a transformation programme, which was really about bringing 5 buildings into 3. And that was a discussion that had been going on for 15 years. And the discussion about bringing the buildings together was driven by the fact that 10 to 15 years ago, there was a prediction that the level of workforce available to service 5 sites in Tayside would not be sustainable in the long run. However, for reasons that I can't describe because I was not here at the time, that decision was not made, and the decision was made in January this year under the leadership of the IJB here in Perth Kinross to endorse that plan to reduce the services from 5 sites to 3. Now, the rationale that lies behind that is that we've already seen a significant shift of people with mental illness away from institutional care. As we know, the old asylums are gone, and the inpatient care that exists today is still variable around the country, and there is evidence that within Tayside there are people who are in hospital who could be managed in the community. So as well as the issue of rationalising the buildings, there is a question about the pathways of care, and there's also a question about the perceptions of how safe services are on behalf of the public. And we've had many people representing to us concerns about the distance between the far reaches of Angus, Perth Kinross and the centres for general adult psychiatry in Dundee, as it will be, and for learning disabilities here in Perth. So we have a plan at the moment which is to look at the way that crisis services are run, and there will be an attempt to bring those back to a much more local distribution. So that will help. In terms of the way in which the services are performing at the moment, there's quite a lot of work going on to look at the performance of the mental health services, and that's been subject to review. Councillor Stewart has been with me to the mental health performance review within NHS Tayside, and he's witnessed firsthand the work that is being done to improve the quality of care. There have been a significant number of activities around about the safety of the buildings, about the ways in which the staffing can be made more sustainable. And we're currently undergoing a programme of looking at how the services can be brought into financial balance. But that has to be carefully constructed alongside making sure that the services are sustained in real time. So there is really good progress there. There is this independent inquiry, which I am not involved with for very obvious reasons, and that will report in due course. However, I would say that this has been a service that has been under significant pressure. It still has a long way to go. However, my sense of this is that we're beginning to see points of light and things turning for the benefit of the people who use those services here in Tayside. The degree of acceptance on behalf of the public will depend very much on how well the community services roll out and how well they deliver the expectations of people here. And that is one of our key themes within the partnership. Mental health and well-being is one of our key work streams that we are concentrating on right now.
Thank you. I noticed that you talked about the quality of the buildings and the quality of care and the staffing, but also that you indicated that staffing concerns were a constraint in terms of the number of facilities you could keep open.
Yes.
What is the strategy for expanding the staffing capacity going forward into the future so that the community solutions can be properly funded or properly staffed?
Thank you. That's a really good question. The shortages of staff are in specific professional groups. There's a national shortage of psychiatrists. We're actually not too badly off here if you compare us with, say, Grampian or other places that are further from the central belt. But nationally across the UK, there's a shortage of psychiatrists. Every year, we produce about 50 new qualified nurses, but more than 50% of the nursing staff are over the age of 50. So we have to look carefully at how we provide these services in future. There's really good evidence from Moray about how using a different skill mix can really bring benefit to people. And they've done very impressive work with long-term people with complex needs, where they've largely run their services through social care models, and they've reduced a lot of the issues for people that have previously faced in institutional care. Here in Perth Kinross, we have approximately 900 people from the third sector who support the work of the partnership, and many of them are engaged in work that supports people with mental illness and learning disability. So we know that there's a problem. What we're trying to do is to make sure that the people who we do have with very highly specialist skills are used for the things that only they can do. So this is essentially a skill mix exercise to make sure that the right level of complexity is dealt with by the right level of complexity, of capability. And obviously, we will be looking to see how we can work with partners to meet the needs of the lower complexity issues that manifest every day in communities all around Perth and Kinross.
Councillor McEwen.
Thank you. Right, I'm referring to page 19 of our papers, which is 5 of Rob's report. And Rob, could you describe how the discharge hub at PRI contributes towards a significant length of stay in hospital being reduced?
Thank you. Yes, I'll do my best. So culturally in hospitals, people come in and they're assessed for what they might need, and their treatment is applied to them, and there will be a number of things that need to be done, and they may be waiting for tests, or they may be waiting for x-rays, they may be waiting for a clinical opinion, they may be waiting for the effects of intervention to make them better. In the past, there hasn't been the same attention to the flow of people going through the hospital. So if you think about the journey between the front door and then the time when you're ready to go home, there are delays built into that. So the discharge hub has been put in place in order to minimize the internal delays and to make sure that as we get ready for somebody coming home, that all of the things are in place for them rather than waiting to the last minute to try and organize them, which in the past had led to delays for people that have now been avoided. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Because, as you've mentioned, being a pharmacist, discharge hubs in different rooms have been done in different styles throughout my career. So what you've described as something pulling together all the services days in advance of the patient needing to go home, not somewhere for the patient to go on the day of the discharge out of the hospital bed.
Absolutely.
Also, on page 25, when people have already mentioned about any waiting times and admission rates and stuff, there's a figure that's not mentioned there. It might be because of the point that Andrew raised about being an executive level report, that sometimes the admissions unit at Perth Royal Infirmary closes to admissions because it's at capacity. And patients are put on divert to Nine Wells Hospital instead.
So
obviously that figure plays into, if PRI units run it at capacity, then its admission rate isn't going to change because it can't change because it's at capacity. And therefore that extra figure sort of adds a wee bit more confidence into those figures.
So our very early work to understand the reasons for difficulty in people being discharged timely from PRI was for us to understand the whole system. And you need to understand what keeps people safe in the community, what can be done in the community in order to keep them at home, what a quick trip to hospital needs and what a longer trip to hospital needs. And what we've done is we've worked our way around all of that to identify the different features that create delay and to try and address them. So there are at least two ports of entry within PRI. There's the direct admissions to Ward 4, and then there's the admissions through A&E, and there would be different type of people for different types of problems. So yes, if there's a problem in delays within hospital capacity, then there is a natural divert to 9 wells, as there is a natural divert to 9 wells if the complexity of the needs of the individual can only be met by the services that are at 9 wells.
Thanks.
One final thing is we often see reports that use benchmarking to compare us to other councils. Obviously within NHS Tayside itself, there are 3 separate IGBs in Angus and Dundee and in Perth and Kinross. Should we not be getting reports and figures relating to the performance? Because how the services are provided differently in the 3 different care settings. And obviously being able to compare ourselves to how well Angus is performing in its discharge rates, its bed occupancies, its discharges, and the same with Dundee, gives us some sort of idea where we sit within our own locale in the Tayside region.
I can see it could be of rudimentary benefit, but I think each locale is slightly different with different problems, and it'd be nuanced, and you could maybe use it as rough data, but I don't know how far you could drill down on it. If everybody can agree, I'm going to draw a halt there. I think, as Diane will know, at pre-agenda, there's a lot of questions I would have liked to ask as well, but you know, time is against us. I was wondering, Rob, if you could maybe commit for yourself and then for your whoever follows on, to maybe come 3 times a year instead of annually, and we could have it in bite-sized chunks, because I'm sure everybody, it's a thing, it's going to affect all of the people of Perth and Kinross. All our families are involved at some time with this service, and we could spread the load, because it's just too much to do in one sitting when there's 5 or 6 papers. So if you wouldn't mind taking on board what Councillor McEwen said about maybe getting some rough data between the 3 different IGBs, or even further afield, and maybe coming back, not to every scrutiny committee, but every second one. I think there's 6 a year. And would you be agreeable to that?
I would be agreeable to that, and in fact we've agreed that we will try and report quarterly to the Audit and Performance Committee, so that'll be slightly out of sync, but we'll manage it some way or other.
Yeah, well,
okay.
And I'll leave that with you, Lisa, to take up. Is the committee happy with that? Okay. To comments now, or have you a question, Councillor Parr? Oh, okay, I'll move the paper. Can we note the report? Well, yes. Okay, so we'll go to comments now. Thank you.
Can I just make the comment that Tom spoke about benchmarking, but we haven't said anything, if you like, anything about baselining. And Rob spoke about the inevitable impact of ageing, and individually I begin to appreciate that, but the population is as well. And I don't think that we, our starting point basically with an ageing population is changing each year. And in terms of the greens and the reds, there may be frankly something that's red that actually represents an improvement year on year, because the nature of the demand has inexorably risen because of the population. And I think we should be seeking to take account of that in the reporting somehow, more than we do with a general acceptance that we have an ageing population. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Parrott. I mean, I completely agree, and in fact, if you read behind even the crude data that we have in front of us today, you will see that some of that could be attributed to the ageing population rather than it being anything to do with the interventions of the partnership.
Yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion, Councillor Parrott, and Rob will take that up, and Diane as well, so thanks for that. Comments? Comment.
Just a brief comment, convener, thank you, on your suggestion for timetabling. The Chief Officer did point out that the IJB has its own Audit and Performance Committee, so we need to be careful that whatever matters you seek to bring forward and ask to be discussed or scrutinised at the Scrutiny Committee don't conflict or duplicate unnecessarily with the matters that will be reviewed at the Audit and Performance Committee of the Integration Joint Board itself. So we might need to have a further discussion
afterwards about
I mean, I think that this type of business coming to the Scrutiny Committee has been talked about for a while, and there's, you know, we have a specific role in Scrutiny in terms of also looking at performance in terms of us as the provider of a service that is commissioned by the board. So, you know, we're looking at we also have a more significant interest in the performance side of adult care and where that's fitting into the integration and how integration is supporting that. I think it might be worthwhile if we sat down and actually had a chat about how that might go, so we could dovetail it so that we're not doing unnecessary duplication, we're not going across each other, but that actually the stuff that's being produced in both committees complements what's going to the other.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Stewart?
I think that's what I've said, yeah.
Okay. But maybe not so eloquently. Moving on to paper 5, this is care inspectorate inspections, and again we'll have Rob Packham to lead us on that one.
Thank you, Convener. I'm going to ask my colleague Diane Fraser to speak to this paper, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. This report outlines the key findings of the inspections undertaken with our registered services during 2017-2018. The partnership has established a quality assurance process which also reports to the Professional and Clinical and Care Governance Group, and that supports our ambition to deliver excellence and continue to provide quality care, which we directly provide on behalf of the Health and Social Care Partnership. The report that was also presented to the IGB and the IGB Audit and Performance Committee, and it has been noted, should be noted by this committee, their request is that we do a further report also outlining the inspection findings from our commission services as well. During 2017-18, 8 out of the 14 services received an inspection by the Care Inspectorate. Should be noted that the grades are of a very good or excellent standard across those services. Also for noting in terms of care at home inspection, the redesign of care at home provided a full-scale review of our internal service, and that included our care at home service, our enablement service, and also looking at our discharge pathways we've already discussed. Following the redesign, there was an investment in the service, and with a commitment to developing and delivering a focused service around early intervention and prevention. The Care Inspectorate have been working with us throughout this process as we developed a new service, which is the Home Assessment Recovery Team. And during this time, we brought together 130 staff. It was a very difficult and challenging time for the staff. It required changes in their work routine and their work practices. However, throughout that, we actually improved the grades, and the grades that were awarded were of very good and excellent. We've also had a recent inspection. Initial feedback suggests that, again, we're performing very well and we're providing very good services and care at home. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Diane. And you can see, everybody can see in the report the high markings that were achieved throughout. It is a little ironic, I feel, that Beach Grove were one of the top marked facilities there, but that's as may be. So I'll open up for questions from any of you. Councillor Illingworth.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to read such a set of fantastic results, so thank you for that.
Agreed.
I'm going to hand paper 6 over to my vice convener, who's going to introduce the Housing Environment 6-month performance summary.
Thank you, convener. This is a report from the Housing Environment Committee on their 6-month performance report for 2018 and 19. It's an exception report, and it has already been to the Housing and Communities Committee on the 31st of October and the Environment and Infrastructure Committee on the 7th of November. It reviews the performance of housing and environment against its business management and improvement plan for the period of the 1st of April to the 30th of September.
It's going to be a short video.
Oh, apparently we're going to see a short video. Are we? So then I'll hand over to Barbara. Hope you all enjoyed that. What's just finished? That's the second time I've seen that now. It's every bit as informative as it was the first time round. So back to the paper. Barbara, do you want to introduce the paper to the...
No, I mean, I'm quite happy, you know, sort of just to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll open up to questions, please. Councillor Purvis.
Could I ask about the work that's been done supporting people in the into work in the hospitality sector? Bottom of page 108 and the top of page 109. I'm not sure in terms of how much the cost was because it isn't in the paper. Not that I'm suggesting it. We should have had all that detail there, but just in terms of, because it's quite a small number of clients, do we do some kind of assessment about the cost per person that we support, and what are the most efficient and cost-effective ways of getting people into the workplace and supporting them in various sectors?
Thank you for that question. You know, sort of, I keep going, no matter how much I'm prepared, I'm never going to be prepared for all of the questions. I don't have that detail to hand, Councillor Purvis, so I'll come back to you on that. Okay.
On page 111, it mentions the Glenfarg Zero Waste Challenge. Is that going to be repeated in other areas?
We have done a number of zero waste challenges. You know, sort of the current one within, you know, sort of Perth City, you know, sort of an element of Perth City, and the Kinross and Glenfarg Zero Waste Challenge are funded, you know, sort of to a good extent by Zero Waste Scotland. What we find is that having done those challenges, then they would not be prepared to fund them again. What we're looking for is a very sustainable approach within each community. So the anticipation would be, as we've done within the Strathearn area and in Highland Perthshire, that, you know, sort of, that there'll be a local group and a community group who'll be keen to take this forward, you know, sort of without additional pump priming money.
Second question. On the next page, 112, it talks about us exceeding the income target for the brown bins. Is the extra income being earmarked for other recycling issues?
Not at the moment. What we're currently doing is looking at, you know, sort of people who may want an additional, you know, sort of green bin, you know, sort of, rather than expanding the routes that we currently have. But, you know, sort of, we need to go through, this is just the first year of it, you know, sort of, we need to see what the impact is from next year, and the cost increase and the price increase that will go through as a part of the already approved budget process.
So you're suggesting sort of 2 bins for the price of one type of possibility?
No, people would have to pay for every additional bin.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stewart, did you have a question?
It was just a point of clarification. The numbers that we're looking at here only relate to the 6-month period. So although in some places we're seeing a full year target or previous year's performance, this is only the 6 months up to now. Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Sorry. And on that basis, on the basis of the 6-monthly information that we have, that's where we're making the assessment of whether we're on target or not on target. Some of our performance indicators we only collect or are given to us, you know, sort of on a yearly basis, and that's why we can't, you know, sort of, so many of them are missing.
And thank you, that's helpful, and that explains just in a wee bit more detail the point about some of the targets not being measurable at this 6-month point. That's very helpful, thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Illingworth and then Councillor Duggan.
Thank you. On page 112, it talks about the use of bed and breakfast accommodation, and it says 1.58 days. I know I should know this, but could you explain what that actually means in terms of keeping people out of bed and breakfast?
Claire will answer that question, Councillor Illingworth.
Hello, thank you for the question. Yes, the Scottish average for placements in bed and breakfast in terms of the average length of stay was 35.9 days last year. So there were obviously a significant number of placements, and the average length of stay nationally was fairly long. Throughout the course of last year, we had 14 placements into bed and breakfast accommodation, and so the average was 1.58 days. So obviously some stayed for just one night and some stayed for a couple of nights, but the overall average was 1.58 days. We only use, as you know, bed and breakfast on absolute emergency situations, so that could be in the instance of a fire or a flood. So we perform well there in terms of bed and breakfast usage and continue to keep that to a minimum.
Thank you.
And just to add to that, I think it's fair, we've been tracking, and doing our benchmarking as we would normally do, and there are some local authorities who are unfortunately acting illegally in terms of the length of stay that they have, for, accommodating young people, in particular children, in bed and breakfast. So again, very good, the figure there is very good, but our practice is recognised as being leading sector as well.
Thank you. Councillor Doohan.
Thanks, Vice Convener. It's page 115 at the top, supporting people to live independent, healthy and active lives. It's the average days in temporary accommodation, all types. So we've made substantial improvements between 16-17 and 17-18, but it looks like we're not going to maintain that, so it's just to get some background.
That'll be clear. I think it's maybe just the target that's hopefully will be way under the target.
I thought that too, Convener, but I take it, well, that obviously means at August it's 74.4. Against our target this year of 80.
It's an average, Councillor Doohan.
Right,
so,
okay.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions? No. Okay. Well, we'd ask the committee to note the comments.
It's the first time I've seen the video, and I'm glad I did, because often we come in here, I think, and we're in our little bubble and discussing, so as my daughter says, discussing things of various viewpoints, and it's only when you see something like that that you can actually see what we can do as a group of people to transform people's lives. And what these people down there, the officers at that end of the table, it must make it a reason to come into work when you see a video like that.
Thank you. Comment?
Yeah, it was just a comment. Following up from Councillor Doogan's question, and I think the point about that specific target is that we should be aiming at less than 80, and sometimes it would be useful, rather than just having a number, to have whether we're targeting, whether we want it to be less than or equals to or greater than or equals to 80. So the point here surely is that it's great news that the 74.4 is beating the less than or equals to 80 days target, rather than previously it's been above and now it's below. Do you see what I mean?
Okay. I can only speak on behalf of Claire and the team, but I would assume that the target would always be wanting to be less than the figure for this one.
Yeah, sorry, my point was that some targets we will want to beat on the positive side, and some we will want to beat on the negative side. And if we've got an indication of that in each of these target boxes, it just makes the interpretation of the data a bit easier. That's all.
Thank you. We'll feed that. We're looking at the performance management framework for the council again, so we'll feed that back into that process. Thank you, Councillor Stewart.
Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Now that we're on to comments, I don't think that the table on page 113 can go without comment. That has to be quite an impressive result, where we come first in 4 out of the 6 categories. Of course, the trick now is to make sure we come first in the other 2 next year. Okay.
And they're working very hard on that.
Thank you, Councillor Parrott. If there are no other comments, then I would ask the committee to note the report.
Thanks, Vice Convener. We'll move on to paper 7, which is the report by the Chief Social Work Officer on the work of the Child Protection Committee. And she's going to give us an overview of the key activities of the work of that committee, which is obviously very important work, and it's important that we can scrutinise all the key strengths, and we'll see that any areas for further improvement are required. Please.
Thank you. I'll stand because there's rather a lot of us over here in the corner. Just to say that I'm very pleased to introduce this report, but to acknowledge that this was approved at the Child Protection Committee at the end of August. The Children, Young People and Families Partnership approved this in September. The Chief Officers Group have seen this as well. That's the Chief Officers Group for Public Protection, now chaired by our new Chief Executive, Karen Reid. It was also received by full council on the 3rd of October. There's an annual update on the work of the Child Protection Committee, and it details the way in which it goes about its evaluation, self-evaluation, and the extent to which children and young people are protected. It contains detail around the high-level messages in relation to performance management information, which is improving year on year in terms of our understanding of that, our shared understanding of that, and how we're using that to analyse trends and dig a bit deeper into that. It also aids our understanding about how we will focus our ongoing evaluation. And the Standards and Quality Report also tries to focus on impact on the community and children and young people themselves, in terms of measuring the difference that we're making across the partnership. This report was also prepared within the year that we had the joint inspection of services for children, which reported in April of 2018. And you'll already know that the Care Inspectorate highlighted the child protection business model as good practice and of interest nationally. And within the last year, Bill Atkinson has been appointed as independent chair of both the Child Protection Committee and the Adult Protection Committee. And we're already working on the areas that we can take forward across both committees. For example, public protection communications and messages to the public. So since this report was produced, we've also published a summary report, which is on the website, which is a four-page document. So it summarises a lot of the material in here and makes it more readily accessible to a wide range of audiences. So if you wish to access that, I just recommend that to you as well. Happy to take some questions, and we have Ross Drummond as the Interagency Child Protection Coordinator here as well.
Thanks, Jackie. So we'll open up for any questions. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you very much. I suppose we're on to about the third bite of the cherry on this report, with all the places it's been to before. But on page 135, I was initially rather confused by table number 7 showing 121 new registrations, but table 9 showing only 83 registrations at present. This, of course, is explained largely by the comment under table number 10 of most registrations last less than a year. But again, as I said previously with regard to the Health and Social Care Partnership, again, it's an average. I think what might be interesting sometimes is how long are some children on the register? You know, how many are on for, say, less than 4 months or over a year, rather than just the average?
We do, as a partnership, consider that regularly, and certainly each quarter there's a report on the length of time that children remain on the register. And certainly it would be a concern for us if children were remaining on the register for lengthy periods without there being progress being made, but also similarly if they were being placed on the register for very short periods, because sometimes that doesn't give enough time to evidence sustain change.
And your question around the differences in the graphs are that's the number of new registrations over the year. So children will come off the register, but the number of registrations at 31st of July is a return that's required by the Scottish Government, and that's measured year on year. So that will give you an indication at as a snapshot at that point in the year how many children whose names are on the register.
Councillor McEwen.
On page 140 and page 141, it talks about an internal audit and an external scrutiny of that audit, identifying an area for development in which we need to engage with fathers. Do you have examples of how we've taken that forward?
Thank you, Councillor McEwen. Could you tell us which page of the Standards and Quality Report that's in?
17 of your actual report at the top. Areas for development.
Page 17.
3.
In terms of the multi-agency case review and your question, could you repeat your question?
It's a bit just before that. It says, greater engagement with fathers is needed to ensure their involvement in the assessment, planning and delivery of care and support for children, including planning for unborn babies. It's the 5th bullet point from the top.
I think we're on, could you just
page 17
say 17 of the report, 5th bullet point, 3rd bullet point.
Under areas for development.
I'm not sure that we've got the same page number. Could you repeat your question, please? So it's the greater engagement of fathers. That area for development is an area that was extracted from the Care Inspectorate's inspection, and because we went through the whole document, picking out all those areas that they highlighted as an area for development. And certainly that's something that we're taking forward through the parenting strategy and our individual plans for children and young people, making sure that we have a greater focus on the contribution that fathers can make in terms of the child protection plans.
I think, Councillor McEwen, you were asking if there were any specific examples that we had at this stage that we could share with you in relation to that, and from what Jackie's saying, I think it's too early to do that, but we would expect to have that in next year's report.
Any other questions for Jackie? Any comments on the report? Can we note the report? Moving on to paper 8, it's Perth Kinross Adult Protection Committee bi-ennial report. And again, I think it will be Jackie Pepper who will lead us on this report.
Yes, thank you very much, Convener. Just to introduce again this report, it's pleasing that it's coming at the same time as the Child Protection Committee's Standards and Quality Report, because I think it's very important that members are able to scrutinise this at the same time and consider the range of work that's being taken forward across these two very important committees in terms of public protection. This biennial report, which is required by the Scottish Government, I think you'll find that this is a very honest report which recognises the range of achievements that have taken place over those 2 years, past 2 years, but also the significant work that has still to be taken forward. And very recently, since this report was published, the Adult Protection Committee has led on a risk workshop looking at leadership, public information, partnerships, the strength of partnerships and accountability, and a detailed focus on key processes. We're also planning an opportunity to visit North Ayrshire next month in response to the Care Inspectorate's publication of a national thematic report on adult protection, and North Ayrshire came out as as a very positive and forward-looking partnership. So we're looking forward to engaging with them in the next few weeks. I'm happy to take questions, and Mary Notman, who's the Interagency Adult Protection Committee coordinator, is here as well.
Thanks, Jackie. I've got a question that's on page 187. I don't know if that's on the same numerical identifier as you have, but it's just a statement that a care home was the location of harm for 56% of people at risk. If you could explain what that means to me, please.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Ling. I understand the concern that would lie behind that, because the expectation would be that people who are resident in a care home would be safe from harm. I'm going to ask Mary to give you a bit of detail as to what lies behind that.
Thank you very much. This is 56% of referrals come in, which is really showing a vulnerability. So the care homes are very well regulated. They have to adhere to national standards. We've got service level agreements, and there's the care inspectorate criteria. So they've got to report any incident to us. So we screen all of these under adult support and protection. Now, in like 17-18, we received a lot of referrals, about 1,300, only 210 progressed to ASP at all, and only 66 went to investigation. So it is highlighting vulnerability, but we've done a lot of work with care homes over the last 4 or 5 years, so I think it's very positive that they're well aware of adult protection, what they have to report, and they're very good at engaging with us about how we have to take forward. The only other point I'd make is, just like Rob was saying about the ageing population, the people we have moving into care homes now are sometimes exhibiting behaviour that can be challenging, and also a huge degree of cognitive impairment. So some of these are also resident-to-resident incidents as well. So while it seems a large number, the actual number that go to adult support and protection is a small percentage of that.
Thank you. So this isn't sort of trips or falls or anything. This is actual incidents caused by friction between two people or something like that.
Sorry, some of them can be falls, some of them can be going past and hitting somebody with a walking stick. Some can be, hitting, some can be tossing food at each other. I mean, it can be varying levels. Some can be mismedication though, and some can be harm by carers. So it goes across that whole range, and then we just say what do we think that meets the adult support and protection threshold, and what just needs to be dealt with by changing the person's care plan or looking at what needs to change within the environment to make people safe.
I think it's encouraging that there's that level of incidents being reported, because you would be concerned if they weren't being reported, and it would also point to if there was one facility where it was a very low rate of reporting, rather than just immediately assuming that nothing's occurring there. You'd be more liable to have a look there because it's below the average, as well as ones that are high. So I think it's useful information. Thanks. Any other questions? Councillor McEwen.
There's a small statement in this that I actually felt quite uncomfortable with how it was worded, so I don't know if I was misunderstanding or whether it's something that should be changed. On page 229, under adults at risk in Perth Kinross, it says people with learning disability account for 30% of all adults at risk. As adults with a learning disability make up only 6% of the overall population, this client group appears to be overrepresented. I understand what that means, but it gives an impression. How it jumped out at me, it just jumped out at me as saying that they're getting too much, they're overrepresented. It's usually a term used to describe not the statistics of it, but that somebody's getting services over and above what they're due. Obviously the services we provide here are done on need, not on what you're due or needed. So I don't know if and it's not, that type of phraseology is not used in the paragraph above it when it talks about the elderly.
I think we'll let Jack intervene, maybe want to change the wording or something.
Yes, I think Councillor McEwen, I think that's a helpful observation. It's certainly something that was part of a discussion that we had only earlier this week as part of our risk analysis workshop. We think the statement is saying that what it's trying to say is that people with learning disabilities are more at risk of abuse and exploitation and harm. And so therefore we need to highlight that, and there's a bit more work that we need to do to actually bring that down. Because what we would want to do is have less people represented in these figures.
Any other questions on this report? Any comments on the report? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you very much, Convener. Again, looking at page 186, it's gratifying to see that the information there will be used to determine future focus for the Adult Protection Committee. Almost half of adults at risk in Perth and Kinross are over 80 years of age. That, I understand, is the fastest growing age group there is. And one hopes that the focus will not just be on the over 80s, but perhaps on the under 80s as well, to make sure they don't fall into the risk category.
Thank you. Can we note the report? Councillor McCall.
Sorry, I just had a comment to make, since I've seen this paper previously at another committee and asked lots of questions. My comment really is in almost as a follow-on to Councillor McEwen's comment about adults with learning disabilities, and that they are a particular demographic that is more at risk proportionally to the population size, and that going forward it would be beneficial perhaps to have a specific strategy for that particular group of adults at risk. And I would suggest to consider that going forward. Thank you.
Can we note the report? Good. You certainly can, and anybody else who wishes as well can have a comfort break. Okay, we'll reconvene now and move on to paper 9, which is a very important paper. It's about raising attainment and the strategy update. This paper's already been at Lifelong Learning Committee on the 31st of October, and I'll just ask Sheena to introduce this report, please.
Thank you, Convener. Short introduction to this report. It provides a progress update on the Raising Attainment strategy, which we kicked off in 2016 and takes us through to 2019. It describes progress on a range of performance measures from early years to post-school participation, and also describes progress of improvements. The progress and performance highlights are summarised in executive summary because we are conscious that this is a detailed paper and there's a lot of information, and we felt an executive summary might be helpful in terms of highlighting some areas of strong performance but also areas of improvement, and then might take the reader into more detailed areas in the body of the report. And whilst we do continue to demonstrate that good progress is being made in many measures, we are very conscious that there remains room for improvement in a number of important areas, and that is the focus of the work for our team. We provided a briefing session for elected members on the content of this report back in October, and it also represents the Council's annual report to the Scottish Government on progress in delivering the priorities of the National Improvement Framework for Scottish Education, which is a statutory requirement for all local authorities. We've got with us James Childs and Roger Hill, Jackie Pepper and myself, who are happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Sheena. We'll just open up for questions. Or any questions on the report? Councillor Dugan.
Page 243, Convener, thank you. Proportion of P1 children meeting all developmental milestones prior to starting school. It's improving, but very, very gradually. How do we anticipate, or how are we planning for that that improvement to accelerate over coming years? The chart at the bottom.
Sheena? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dugan. This came about as a result of the early years national collaboratives where Stretch Aims were set nationally for all children and young people. Now, we understand that there will always be some young people who, for very good reasons, will not meet all of their developmental milestones. But the key to for me, to the 48-month review is actually what's done at the 27 to 30-month review in terms of the interventions that are put in place at that point. And so we're working very closely with our colleagues in health and other partners as well, but particularly in health. So when difficulties are identified at that point, that there's a range of interventions and support put in place there. Now, one example of that work is around the speech and language therapy, and how we have looked again at how we target a finite resource in a more appropriate way, so that the number of young people who are identified, for example, at 27 to 30 months with not meeting their developmental milestone in relation to speech and language therapy actually have earlier intervention. So we would hope that through that kind of approach, where incrementally we build on from the data that we are able to gather, there is also a move now to undertake further assessments when youngsters are aged between 12 and 15 months, because we know that some of the difficulties that may not become more apparent until they're older can actually begin to manifest themselves at that early stage. So hopefully it's that combination of early intervention will help. And the very targeted approaches then that young teachers are able to take when youngsters come into school with that kind of information being available to them is invaluable.
Thank you. Convener, I've got a second question, if that's okay. Is page 245. It's the proportion of school leavers achieving literacy and numeracy level 4 and 5. The narrative just above that points to the slight gap between our virtual comparators and Perth and Kinross, and it says that continued focus is required in these areas, both for numeracy and literacy. What does
Thank you for your question, Councillor Dugan. Continued focus is the rollout of our literacy and numeracy strategy across all years, and looking at how we approach literacy and numeracy in all our establishments. It's also a key focus of collaborative work, numeracy particularly, about looking about expert help and expert support around about us from within the authority and outside our neighbouring authorities as well. So we have a range of strands and strategies to approach numeracy. We're also working with our curriculum improvement networks in terms of numeracy, and raising and working with schools in terms of targeting their provision of numeracy within individual schools.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Again, a matter of understanding statistics. On page 253, I understand the business of the equity line and the excellence line, but I don't quite get the colour, the filled-in circles and the empty circles. I assume they represent the whole population and the percentage of the population in each SIMD, and that seems to be consistent in P1, P4 and P7 on page 253, but I can't believe that between 2016 and 2017 in S3 there's been a considerable decrease in the overall population, because all of the blue circles are smaller than the white circle before. Has there been a huge drop-off in S3 population?
I think I'll ask James to see if he can answer that question, because I'm not sure there has been a drop-off in those numbers. James?
There hasn't been a significant change, no. I'd need to go back and look at the raw numbers to be totally clear. Some of this is due to there being smaller numbers. The further up you go from P1, P4, P7, S3, you're talking relatively smaller numbers. And particularly at the lower end of the scale, in SIMDs 1 and 2, you're talking very small numbers. Less than 7% of our school population falls into those two categories. So it's a relative change, and the size of those bubbles is intended to indicate the cohort size across that year group rather than the whole population. So it is a smaller group initially, and then each one will be a smaller slice of that. And what SIMD 1 and 2 are even then a much smaller slice. But I would have to go back to look at the actual numbers to get a totally clear picture on that.
I think it might be worthwhile. I'm convinced there's something wrong with those sizes in S3, but there we go.
So could I just say, Convener, that we'll look at that and seek to understand if there is something incorrect in terms of how the information has been represented, or whether it does fit with the explanation that James has provided.
Any further questions? I'll ask a question that's on page 3 of the report. It says boys remain more likely to not meet the developmental milestones. Is there anything that can be Councillor Duggan's smiling at me as though we smiling. Yes, probably assuming that we probably assuming that some of us never get to catch up in developmental things. What was it? What was it? Developmental. I got there, which is quite good when you. Oh yeah, I can see. Okay, is there something that we can do, or is it just nature?
That's a huge question. Nature, nurture, environment, or so the answer is, for as long as I've been working in education, that's the kind of profile that we see, that there are different maturity rates in relation to different of the developmental milestones. There are somewhere, that's the overall picture in relation to boys not doing less well, and it's purely a maturity thing in terms of some aspects of their development. All you can do really is try to ensure that when these youngsters are coming into nursery and into school, that the kind of activities that are planned for are those that will engage interest and therefore help youngsters move on at a rate, because we know that there are different things interest a whole range of different youngsters, and it's not just always as straightforward as this approach for boys and that approach for girls. It's always about an appropriate blend. So there's unfortunately not a simple straight answer to your question, Councillor Lang.
Okay, thanks. More questions?
It was a follow-up to that question, Convener. Thank you. If the profile of this remains the same, and this is what you've seen through your career within Education Executive Director, then are the milestones set correctly? Because if boys are always less likely to meet certain developmental milestones at certain points in time, and that's, as you've related your experience over a number of years, not a great, a number of years within education.
30 years, as was proven last night.
30 years. But if that's your experience over that period of time, then does it mean that the milestones against which we're measuring individuals are not accurately reflective of the profile of the population at certain ages as a whole?
And the question you've just asked is often asked in relation to the population as a whole, if we take away the gender. But for some young people with some particular needs, they will never meet these expected developmental milestones, and that can be quite disheartening, actually, for parents and carers of some of those young children, and indeed for the young children themselves. So how we undertake this is done very sensitively. But what you're saying then is, would we lower our expectation in relation to boys or girls? And the reality is that what we've got is, if there is such a thing as, where would you expect most of the population to be at any given time? Because it's not just straightforward that boys always underperform or don't reach these milestones that in relation to girls. There is some variability in that, but that is the general trend.
Councillor Ahern.
Thank you. My question's on table 20 on page 274 with regards to the proportion of looked after children school leavers with positive initial destinations. And I see there's been quite a dramatic decrease. In fact, we've gone below the virtual comparator for the first time since 2012. I just wondered if there's any indication as to why or what's happening.
I wonder if Jackie or Roger might be able to answer that question.
One of the challenges with this data is the very small cohort that we are dealing with here, and that is likely to have substantial fluctuation from year to year, but it's something that we look at quite closely. James, have you got anything to add to that?
I think just to give an idea of when you say small numbers, looked after school leavers are there's usually less than 20 in any one year, quite often more like 10. So a change of 1 or 2 children and young people achieving as expected can make a huge difference to percentage numbers. But that doesn't at all mean that they aren't looked at carefully. In fact, the numbers we're looking at there, although there is a large change, are 3-year averages, which is an attempt to try and ameliorate some of that variability from year to year. But even then, obviously, over 3 years, you may be only talking 30 young people. So there will necessarily be some large changes. However, that certainly will be monitored on an ongoing basis and is looked at regularly, and looked after children in particular are looked at as a group against all sorts of metrics, not simply attainment, to make sure that they aren't being adversely affected, which in many cases they are just by their circumstances.
Thanks. Do we have any comments? No comments. Okay, can we note the report? Paper 10, Lisa Simpson will introduce this report about the complaints handling procedure within the council.
This is the standard annual report that we have to produce predominantly to comply with our public performance requirements for the Scottish Public Service Ombudsman. So a lot of the statistics and indicators are their prescribed indicators, and we just have to provide the statistics. In the main, this is a good news story. The complaints handling process has shown to be robust, appropriate and adequate in terms of a process and a procedure and frontline resolution. There's a very, very, very small percentage that actually go and escalate all the way through the process to the SPSO, and the number of those that then come back with any concrete recommendations which require a change, again, are very, very small numbers. There's nothing in any of the data that we're looking at in terms of the types of complaints, the nature of the complaints, the services, that would indicate any particular trend, hotspot, policy, deficiency, etc. So from that point of view, we're very pleased with the performance of the complaints handling process, but I'm happy to take any questions.
So we'll open up for questions. Councillor Parrott.
Thank you very much. I'm sure I've asked this before, but obviously the total number of complaints received is obviously not the same figure as the total number of complainers.
No.
Do we have any evidence of what might be called serial complainers, who, if you like, devalue the process and might be taken or handled differently in the statistics?
I don't actually know if we break that down in terms of the statistics that we have to provide. I'll go back and ask the complaints team and have a look into that.
Callum, sorry, Councillor Purvis.
Just a couple of questions. First, in terms of, I know you were saying about it's prescribed, the indicators that we've got to put down in this report, but in terms of giving us more information, I know on Appendix 5 we've got a further breakdown by service of the ones that have gone to the SPSO, and then there a percentage of the total complaints, I think, from PKC. So I suppose we could work out how many those were, but perhaps if we could have that in more detail than we're getting on Appendix 2 of just by service, so further down within each service, and what type of things you know, like the garden waste charge is one at 1.5. We've got a specific indication because we've had a lot of complaints about that. But it would be quite useful, I think, for us to have more detail on if there are specific things that are getting a lot of complaints, if they could be highlighted.
I think that was the very point, though, Councillor Purvis. We're not seeing these things.
So other than that,
would be highlighted. I mean, a lot of the complaints are actually people just not happy with decisions or.
Well, that's my next question.
Yeah, a lot of people are just not happy with the decision that can't actually be changed by any particular complaints process because there's not. They're just not happy with an outcome.
So my next question is. Can we or should we distinguish between strategic and operational complaints? Because I think the garden waste charge is a good example. It's a decision of the council. You know, if people are complaining about they've not received their permit or they couldn't pay in cash or if their bin hadn't been collected, then clearly that's an operational complaint and would go through the process. If they're complaining about the decision of the council, that's not, you know, often the response that they'll get is just this was the decision of the council, which is probably not going to satisfy them anyway. But from a political perspective, and regardless of when the decision was made or who made it, sometimes, and certainly in relation to the garden waste charge, if you're taking the time to explain to people that, you know, it's one of the few things we can charge for in terms of a non-statutory service, the fact that you know, pressures on budgets and things like that. And if you give them a wider, you know, the fact that when it was originally introduced, it was charged for, that the Scottish Government used to give us money specifically for that purpose, the fact that not everyone in Perth and Kinross gets it, people are more open to, no one likes having to pay for anything, but they're less concerned about that and can see the reasons for the decision. Is that something that we can, when it's specifically a complaint about the decision of the council, it's not really an operational, it's not a concern about an operational matter. Do you see what I mean?
No.
Can we do anything about that? And in terms of the legislative requirements around complaints as well?
If there are complaints that are about policy decisions that have some either basis in law or some legal explanation, then a standard response will be drafted, and that will be the response that will be issued in terms of explaining, just like what you've been talking about, how we got to where we did or what the legislative authority for that decision is, or however that may be. The SPSO basically says they're all complaints, doesn't really care whether they're complaining about have to pay for my garden waste or whether I'm not happy with some other service or whether they're not happy with a timescale not being complied with or whatever. So there's no distinction there. The systems that we've got that actually process all of these are probably not sophisticated enough to be able to quite easily break down that type of thing, and it is a very small team who handle corporate complaints. So in terms of the amount of work that goes into actually producing the stats that we need to produce at the moment, is quite a labour-intensive process. It would be one of those things, though, that if we were ever getting to the stage where we were looking to update a system or develop a complaint system or looking at some of the information and business management information that we're looking at, it's one of those things that's always on the radar, and when there will be investment, we would look to try and develop something like that. If there was something that was coming out, though, in terms of, we were quite mindful of the garden waste one because we almost anticipated a degree of complaints. And interestingly, we didn't get nearly as many complaints as we thought we were going to get. Out of the 36,000 permits that were issued, 85 complaints, which is actually a relatively small number. So the complaints team are quite mindful where we've had significant policy change, and we would look at that if there was significant numbers. And there's constant dialogue with directors and senior officers around how we manage the communications around these policy changes to try and minimise that number. And if there was anything coming out from the complaints or the type of complaints that were coming that we thought merited further looking at, then that's what we would do, and that could be reported back through this committee.
Convener, is that all right?
Yes.
I suppose when we get media inquiries in, if they're of a political nature, then the response will come from the convener or the vice-convener, whereas if that's not the case, then it would come from a spokesperson or something else. Would it ever be appropriate, if something like the garden waste charge were to have a policy decision again, to have a response that went out as a response to a complaint from the convener of the relevant committee, because it is political in nature?
I think it's one of those things that we would just look at. It would depend on the nature and circumstances, and we would decide on the basis at the time. I mean, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. Sometimes it's more prudent that it's a political response. Sometimes it's a more prudent response to actually protect the politicians from that and manage that as an operational decision. It would depend on what the nature of the issue was.
Thanks. No more questions. Any comments?
I've got 2 comments, please. First, we should welcome complaints. A fantastic source of information about how we're performing, and it's just great. We should go, yippee, we've got a complaint, and that tells us what we're doing, and then we can make change. The second comment is to the other councillors. It's actually a really good idea to have a copy of the complaints leaflet to go to community council, so you can explain to people what the complaints process is, but that's just a comment. Thank you.
Thank Councillor Stewart.
Sorry, you skipped ahead from questions very quickly there, convener. Would it be all right to ask a question? So my question was specifically the report refers to the formal complaints, and I was wondering whether the council has mechanisms for monitoring feedback, and by which I mean informal complaints. So, you know, people phoning up and asking a question because something isn't clear, while not necessarily being treated as a complaint because they don't go to the extent of filling in a form, might be feedback that we have introduced a new thing without properly thinking through the consequences of it, or how we wanted as an organisation to implement it in the smoothest way possible. And I'm just reflecting that in the private sector there will be numerous sources of feedback that will inform a process of continuous improvement, and that focusing solely on formally made complaints, which can be, by the very nature of the procedure, a deterrent to some members of the public in making a complaint, focusing solely on that could be restricting us in terms of the amount of feedback and continuous improvement that we can gain.
I think I can give you some assurance on that in terms of I wouldn't be misled by the term formal. I mean, that's simply a reflection of the requirement that local authorities have to have a recognised official complaints handling process. But you won't recall, but a couple of years back there appeared to be a real spike in the number of complaints, and that's because we'd done a lot of work with services with getting people to recognise that these type of interactions where they phone up a service and you know, are unhappy with something or unclear about something should actually be processed as a complaint in its broadest sense. So there's a whole host of these complaints won't have been as a result of a formal form filled in. They will be a result of a phone call to the service, who then records that as a complaint, that type of interaction. And actually there's been a steady increase in the number of people who are taking up the opportunity to use the complaints process for that. Services are much more switched on in terms of recognising that what might seem as just a chat or a grumble about something should actually be processed and captured as a complaint for that very reason. And in terms of the wider issue around sort of consultation and feedback, I think Sheena and Barbara would confirm that that's a bit of a hot topic for us at the moment in terms of looking to make sure that we can enhance these mechanisms in terms of shaping some of the decisions that we're making, particularly making sure that we're deriving best value from the issues that we've got. So that's actually being discussed and is recognised as something that we would always be working on. But I wouldn't like you to think that some of that informal interaction isn't being captured as in complaints, because that will form a substantial part of these stats.
Thanks very much.
Okay, can we note the report? Great, thank you. So we'll move on to paper 11, which is developer contributions. This is a paper that's originated within this committee. Moving forward, as everyone will know, we've spent some time talking about various issues that we perceive that some have been explained through and some will agree with and some we don't. So this paper is a summary of things that we have raised. I think that a lot of the drive behind it was that fairness was what we were looking for within it, and to be demonstrated to be fair and equitable for everybody, and not just the easiest option of calculating the developer contributions. But I'll let Barbara introduce this report and then we can have a discussion of it.
Thank you, convener. I think that you've covered most of the things I was going to say. I think that clearly this has been subject of a lot of discussion, out with the actual formal scrutiny sessions. But myself and my officers would be happy to take any questions.
Open it for questions or comments. They don't have to be questions first. It's just what anybody is take on this is and what they wish to, how they wish to proceed with this. So just mix it up as you want. Councillor Dugan.
Yeah, thanks, convener. It's just to get help with the tables. If we take the table on page 300, so that table indicates that a number of developments of one dwelling, 121, generated £750,000, whereas developments of over 5 properties, of which there were 24 contributions, generated only £300,000. So even assuming that of those 24 contributions or developments, they only built 5 houses, it's still about 125 houses, which is still the same as it's in the region of the same amount of houses built one at a time, but it generates less than half the income. I don't understand how that table is working, unless the 24 is 24 houses, but I'm not sure how that works either.
I'll pass over to you, and I think you're probably correct with what you're thinking there, that it's probably just 24 houses, because it's 5+, so you could have...
Yes, thank you for this. Yeah, that relates to the number of houses that have paid, but what you've got to understand, the 5+ developments are generally through, this is what's been collected to date, and the 5+ unit developments are generally secured through Section 75 legal agreements, which spread the payments as those developments progress. So where we've actually received the contribution, it may be one of 10 houses, one of 20 houses, and as the development progresses, that number will increase the amount of money we collect.
Thanks. It might have been useful to see, do we have it? I've not noticed in any of the tables the total that's due to come to us through the Section 75s, and that would give us a percentage of the total monies that would be coming in.
Those figures aren't broken down. Paragraph 3.1 sets out that we've approximately secured £39 million through Section 75 legal agreements, but that includes a range of contributions such as transport, education, A9 contributions, and also affordable housing commuted sums. So I haven't provided a breakdown of that at the moment.
So that's £39 million, and coming from 1+ developments is 745,000.
No, to date, well, yes, to date we've actually collected 1.62 million from, as per paragraph 3.4. sorry, table under 3.4, that's from 1 unit developments. But the larger scale developments, generally 5 plus, we've secured approximately £39 million from those larger scale developments.
Which is more pertinent, really.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say.
I think we're probably better with that table than without it, but only just maybe.
Yeah.
The report is helpful, and I think it moves on that which we've been asking for. And I'm very conscious that we're simply providing output that the planning MOG is going to deal with and make recommendations or not from that. But what I would urge colleagues on this committee and the planning MOG to consider as well is the possible drag on development and impediment to populations and sustainability of populations in areas out with Perth. I think that's never been more important than now. And this I see as a policy, and officers have made a reasonable job of making a compelling proposition for keeping the status quo. I think that's fair to say. But nevertheless, we need to look at not just the financial cost, but also the sustainability and opportunity cost to people living out with Perth and its environs to creating a home that they want to live in and stay in. And that's all I say.
Councillor Barrett.
If we can return to the table at 3.4, I hear what was said about section 75 and contributions being paid at the end of the process, and therefore that 24 contributions may only represent a small number of what is ultimately liable. But those figures purport at para 3.4 to represent the whole period from May 2009 to October 2018. A development is finished in much less than 9 years, I would have thought. So I really still don't understand how developments of 5 plus dwellings can only have raised 24 contributions unless each of those developments was of 7 or so houses and there were 3 of them.
I think the key point here is that the larger scale developments take a number of years to start, and sometimes they are quite slow to actually deliver. Also, where a lot of applicants enter into Section 75 legal agreements, they don't either have an immediate builder on board to start the site immediately, or they may be looking to bring forward just a planning application from that site and then sell it on to a third party, which again then takes further time for those sites to come forward.
So if I may, you're saying that 9-year time frame that's covered by this table, it's quite conceivable that actually a development has had authority, but that Section 75 agreement, if you like, or order is still in place and the development is ongoing?
Yes.
Okay.
I do find if that table was printed out in public to show that the number of 1 dwellings contribute all this money already, and developers through the Section 75 have only contributed that amount, I think members of the public would find that amazing. I'll let Peter Marshall speak first and then yourself.
In relation to that.
Okay, I'll let you speak if it's in relation.
Thank you. I mean, Councillor Parrott asked one of the questions or pointed out some of the anomalies of that table. I also agree with what Councillor Lang has said. I think the table would be better served, therefore, that if there is Section 75 orders or perhaps potential contributions in the pipeline, that was reflected to give us a complete picture the whole way around. I think this table feels deliberately skewed to highlight the contribution disproportionately that single development or single dwelling developments is making. I still find that even in a 9-year period, as Councillor Parrott has said, that there's only that amount of contribution actually achieved of £160,000. There has been a significant amount of development in Perth and Kinross over this period of time in terms of new buildings, large scale developments that have been completed. So I find it perplexing that these numbers don't seem to reflect that at all. So I think more clarity is required around that paper, certainly before, or those tables, both of them, the one that Councillor Dugan highlighted as well, because they are not clear at all as to the complete picture.
Can I
Mr.
can I
Marshall.
come in? I think that, you know, sort of the discussions have always been about developer contributions. You know, sort of we've tried, you know, sort of, and Ewan and Peter have tried very carefully to, you know, sort of provide the information. You know, sort of within this, there is absolutely no attempt to skew any of that information.
It is factual, you know, that's what's been collected, but I think you have to take in what is going to come, because the percentage, it looks as though there that 80% is collected through single developments, which would then push you towards, well, we have to keep single developments, developer contributions, because there's nothing else coming, because it's 80%. But actually, what is due to come in is less than 5%, it's about 3% or something like that. That's, I think, the point that we're trying to make here.
If I could perhaps maybe make one point here. You're right that over the last 9 years there's been a lot of development, but the development that was happening in the first 4 or 5 years of that period, and possibly even developments going on at the moment, were not subject to the developer contributions policy because they gained consent before that. One example would be the Ochterarder Master Plan framework, which came into play, you know, quite a long time ago, but didn't have education contributions kicking in until it got to 500 houses. So you have also got developments which have been happening in areas where there are no contributions required. So I think as you go forward in another 5 and 10 years period, you'll see a completely different picture.
Okay. Councillor Ellingworth.
Thank you, Convener. The point of developer contributions, I think, is to recognise the additional costs that somebody putting a house or number of houses imposes on the community widely, and it's an attempt to redress the balance. I really don't see what the difference is whether the development is 500 houses or one house. One house will have a cost on the environment, and you need to collect that cost, otherwise it won't be fair. So I'm in favour of maintaining the status quo.
I think it depends on where the house is and the need for the housing. If you're in a rural area, that can make the difference if it's a self-builder who is going to live in the house. That was the whole premise of the argument. And as you can see, is it fair at the moment we have 80% collected from single build people, self-builders, 80% of it, and 20% from that we'll get sometime from developers? Barrett.
Sorry, just returning to the table, I think it presents factually what it counts, but I think it might be better if it included what you might call the outstanding liability to payments from developments. That would then present a fuller picture of where the balance lay. And if I may, whilst I'm speaking, looking at the different approaches, and I know this will go forward to the Member Officer Working Group, but I have to say I like the idea that I know it takes extra effort, but I like the idea that is used in Aberdeenshire of smaller properties being charged nothing if they're one bed, and then on a sliding scale. Thanks.
Yes, Councillor Duggan.
Councillor Parrott just beat me to that. The planning MOG, it seems to me, needs to get the result of our deliberations on the basis of the information that's before us today, which I have every confidence in, and I think we all do. However, that needs to be supplemented because we've identified a significant shortcoming in the way both of those tables are presented. And Councillor Parrott's point about we need to look not that which has been received, but that which is received and due in order to get the fullest picture of the landscape. And that has, I would be happy, convener, if we tasked officers to supplement this paper with that information, and that was as well as to be communicated to us for our own information, but that was to enhance the information and data that the planning MOG can scrutinise. I think that would be helpful.
Thanks, Barbara. Would you like to come in?
No, I'm happy to agree to that. Obviously, you know, sort of, and obviously the point that Councillor Dugan made earlier on about sustainability, and we'll get officers to pick that up to support the discussion and subsequent feedback back to this committee from the planning MOG.
And included in that would look at the other approaches by other local authorities for house sizes. Thanks.
Yes, just really, and I think I thank you for the point about a lot of planning developments being already approved prior to the collection and this regime starting. But I think for completeness, we should be able to model some of those things and be able to say, well, had this been in place, then this is what this would have looked like, and at least would it give us some proportionality against the single developments. I also think if you're doing the options appraisal against the other you know, models that the other councils use, that we do it across the board. And again, use the modelling of the work that's been, the houses that have been completed over the past 10 years, not just the money that's collected, because that will probably give us a better indication of how it is going forward.
I don't like cutting this any shorter, but unless anybody's got any real objections to what we're proposing, it'd be good, because I don't want to incur the wrath of several ladies at this table as we're 4 o'clock. We would hate to miss our colleagues' retirement. That's a terrible thing. It's actually her leaving due. But I'll let you speak, Councillor Stewart.
Hi. Thanks, Convener. I just want... there are a number of interesting alternative approaches adopted by other local authorities, although I think that we might be missing out some of the local authorities, as the total there isn't 32 plus 2 national parks. But going back to the issue of the amount liable by developers versus the amount paid so far, and the £39 million total that has been secured through Section 75 legal agreements, I wonder if, I don't want to make this more complicated, but I wonder if we're then in a situation where we are being, well, we know we've already discussed, and we know that we're in a situation where the single developer is more likely to pay up front because they then don't have to bear the cost, which is disproportionately high, of entering into a Section 75 legal agreement with the council, because they would have to pay out hundreds of pounds in order to do that, in order to defray their the expense of the Section 75 agreement. So they generally tend to pay up front, and developers, because it's the same roughly hundreds of pounds that they have to pay, even though that the scale of the development is so much bigger, they're more likely to defray it. But I wonder whether we're actually then being overly generous in terms of the timing of the income that we receive from the Section 75 legal agreements. So we're getting it all up front from the individual developers, but it's individual unit developers, but it's being strung out over a very long period of time if you've got more than 5 a development of more than 5 dwellings. And you can see that just by looking at by the discussion that we've had and cross-referencing paragraph 3.1 with 3.4. So that might be another issue.
I see exactly what you're saying. You want that incorporated into what they're looking at. It's the length of time, and I don't know if it's statutory or not, the length of time from Section 75 being invoked to payment.
I don't think I want to complicate this discussion, but I think it's another discussion that I would like us to have the information on, so that we can make an informed decision about that.
Thanks. We'll agree. We'll bring them back. So can we agree the paper to move forward as is? Subject to what we've said.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much.